Hell's Forbidden Mate. A Werewolf Shifter Romance written by D. Devine. Part 1. Prologue. Kaeren's existence had been shaped by nothing but terror and anguish, evident in his haunted eyes and the multitude of scars marking his body, accompanied by fresh wounds still in the process of closing. However, Kaeren understood all too well that these injuries would not heal before he faced yet another round of torment. Kaeren was the youngest child of the village alcoholic, a man whose words demanded obedience lest a beating ensued. His father had secured his mother by paying her parents for the most beautiful woman in the town, resulting in 3 offspring, 2 sons and a daughter. While his father's abusive nature had already been apparent when they married, it momentarily subsided after the birth of his first child. Yet, when Kaeren was born as a small and fragile baby, the 3rd child, his father, who hadn't wanted a runt, resumed his cruel ways. The baby Kaeren, however, grew into a towering 6-foot-tall figure. Despite his height, Kaeren's frame was painfully thin, nothing but skin stretched over bones, due to his father's habit of feeding him only 3 times a week and giving him just enough water to sustain life. Now 20 years old, Kaeren's face still retained a boyish softness, with calm blue eyes and light black hair that made him an easy target. He had been taught from a young age that fighting back only resulted in greater suffering. Kaeren often wondered why he hadn't attempted to escape, but the fear of his father hunting him down and exacting a slow, agonizing punishment kept him rooted. His musings were cut short when the door to the house he shared with his parents slammed open. His siblings had long since left, either marrying or serving in the military. A gust of icy air swept through the open doorway before it was abruptly shut with a loud bang. "Renee, Kaeren, get in here now, boy," his father Dregan slurred as he stumbled into the living room. Kaeren hurriedly emerged from the kitchen, knowing from bitter experience that the longer he delayed, the harsher the punishment would be. "Yes, sir," Kaeren replied, keeping his gaze fixed on Dragon's shoes. He dared not meet his father's eyes, recalling the last time he had made such a mistake. It had earned him burns from molten candle wax poured onto his bare skin. "I've heard talk about you today, boy," Dragon growled, glaring at his youngest son, his eyes scanning Kaeren's tall, lanky frame draped in ill-fitting, tattered clothes. "What kind of talk, sir?" Kaeren asked, his voice trembling with fear as he continued staring intently at the Maricel. Or don't play dumb with me," Dragon barked, his voice rising with every word. "Apparently people think I'm holding some weakling here against his will, or that you've been sneaking out of this house." "No, sir, I wouldn't dare," Kaeren replied quickly, though his hasty denial only seemed to infuriate Dragon further. Dragon grabbed Kaeren's chin and forced him to look up into his bloodshot brown eyes. Kaeren flinched at the sight. His father looked even more monstrous up close, with his dishevelled black hair, an unruly beard, and hatred burning in his gaze. Despite being a foot shorter than Kaeren, Dragon's muscular frame and protruding gut radiated raw strength. "Liar! You know you're forbidden to leave this house without my say-so," Dragon roared, striking Kaeren across the jaw with his fist. Clutching his throbbing jaw, Kaeren knew it would likely bruise, though at least the bone hadn't been broken. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to," Kaeren whimpered, but it was too late to pacify his father's drunken rage. Dragon unbuckled his belt and ordered Kaeren to sit with his back to him. Gripping the metal side of the belt, Dragon lashed Kaeren's back, tearing through his threadbare shirt and leaving deep red welts that oozed blood, pooling on the Maricel or... Silent tears streamed down Kaeren's face as black spots clouded his vision. Overwhelmed by pain, he collapsed. Hours later, Kaeren regained consciousness. Stretching his stiff body, he winced as the agony in his back threatened to bring fresh tears to his eyes. A groan broke the silence, and Kaeren quickly turned toward the sound. It came from Dragon, sprawled across the couch with a bottle of liquor dangling from one hand and the belt still clutched in the other. "Next time I'll kill that bastard. He's not even mine." "That whore cheated on me," Dragan slurred in his sleep, throwing the belt onto the Maricel. Rising shakily to his feet, Kaeren ignored the searing pain in his back and made his way to the kitchen. A strange, unexplainable pull urged him to leave. He would miss his brother and sister, but not his parents. Determined, Kaeren packed the meager food and water available into a backpack. Unable to carry it on his injured back, he slung it across his chest, donned a thick coat, and stepped into California's frigid January air. Without looking back, Kaeren ran, the biting cold nipping at his skin. He pushed through, each step carrying him closer to a life far removed from the torment he had endured. Chapter 1. A wolf prowled through the wilderness of Utah, but this wasn't an ordinary wolf. He was an alpha werewolf, powerful and in charge. His strong body was ready for anything, as his padded feet stepped carefully through the snowy forest. Maricel ha. His nose was high in the air, sniffing for something to satisfy the hunger and rage stirring inside him. This was his land, and he had claimed it as his territory since the day his father fell in battle. It had only been 5 years since he became the alpha, a short time for a werewolf. His father had led the pack for 3 centuries before finally being overpowered by rogue wolves who wanted to destroy them. The alpha's father had been a remarkable leader, fiercely defending the pack and their land. He had done so well that some pack members doubted his son's ability to take over so quickly. The memory of their doubt made the wolf inside him furious. He deserved their respect. His thoughts were interrupted when a scent caught his attention. It was human. The wolf's hunger surged, overpowering the man within. He sprinted toward the smell, ready to end the life of whoever it belonged to. But when he found the human, a pale, skinny man, something shifted. The bloodlust faded slightly. The man inside the beast thought of something different, keeping this mortal alive for his amusement. His father had kept pets before, adding one more wouldn't hurt. The werewolf grabbed the fragile man, tossing him over his broad back, and sprinted toward a cabin where he kept his collection of pets. Supernatural creatures, and a few humans. When he arrived, he shifted back into his human form, threw on a shirt and pants, and dragged the man inside. The cabin had a room filled with cages, and the smell of fear and filth hung thick in the air. "We've got a new guest," he said, grinning as he shoved the man into an empty cage. The human's frail body hit the wall, and the werewolf decided he'd die if he was handled too roughly in this state. Without hesitation, the werewolf used his claws to cut his own hand, letting his blood drip into the man's mouth. He locked ankle cuffs onto him and splashed water on his bruised body. The human stirred awake, groaning in pain. His eyes darted round the room, taking in the cages, the filthy conditions, and the smell of despair. "What's your name, boy?" the werewolf growled. "Kaeren," the man replied nervously, his voice shaking. "What's yours?" "Vargas," the werewolf replied with a snarl. "What are you?" Kaeren asked, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes filled with fear as he glanced at the cages and the creatures within. Fergus smirked. "You'll find out soon enough. I've turned you into one of us, a werewolf. You're my pet now. You'll learn your place." Kaeren didn't understand. Why? Why do this? Fergus growled and grabbed Kaeren by the throat. "You're mine now, and I'll teach you what that means," he said, his amber eyes glowing with menace. He threw Kaeren back into the cage and stormed out, leaving the human to process his new reality. Kaeren sat in the cage, his mind racing with thoughts about his life and the terrible change he was going through. He could feel something different inside him, as if 2 beings now lived within him, one calm and logical, the other wild and untamed. Slowly the injuries on his body began to heal. Scars faded and he could feel his strength returning, but the smells of the cabin overwhelmed him. The stink of urine, filth, and fear made him gag. He fiddled with the cuffs on his ankles to distract himself from the loneliness. "Stop making noise with those chains," a female voice growled from the darkness. Kaeren froze, instantly dropping the cuffs. He leaned back in the cage, realizing he wouldn't be leaving any time soon. The thought of never being outside again made him whimper. Inside, the wild presence in him stirred, clawing to break free. But Kaeren fought to keep it contained, though the pressure inside him grew stronger with each passing moment. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. Kaeren woke up suddenly the next morning as the door to the building where he was kept slammed open. The loud noise echoed in the room and heavy footsteps thudded on the maracel. Oh! Kaeren could hear the werewolf approaching. "Wake up, pup. It's time you learned what it means to be my pet," Fergus said with a sneer, standing right in front of Kaelen's cage. Fergus unlocked the cell and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He moved toward Kaelen slowly, taking his time. To him, Kaelen must have looked like a scared animal frozen in fear. "Learn what?" Kaelen asked softly, his voice timid as Fergus came closer. Now that Kaelen could clearly see him, Fergus's angry brown eyes reminded him of his father's. His short, messy dark hair had a wild look, and his muscular body seemed ready to strike at any moment. "Learn what it means to be my new toy. I'll break you like the others," Fergus said darkly. He reached out and grabbed Kaelen by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Fergus fastened Kaelen's hands above his head with chains, leaving him hanging so he couldn't defend himself. Kaelen's limbs dangled, powerless. "Rape me?" Kaelen whispered, his voice shaky, fear clear in his eyes as Fergus's gaze glimmered with a hint of gold. "Yes," Fergus growled, his voice deep and threatening. Without warning, he punched Kaelen hard in the stomach, the blow so strong it left him gasping for air. Kaelen had endured pain his whole life, but Fergus's strength took him by surprise. The punch made him cough violently, his throat burning. His eyes stung with tears, though he tried to hold them back. Inside him, the wolf was furious at his weakness. A growl escaped Kaelen's throat, loud and startling. Both he and Fergus were taken aback by the sound. "Good," Fergus said with a smirk. "I like it when they fight back. Makes it more fun." He continued hitting Kaelen, blow after blow, while Kaelen's growling grew louder. Eventually, Fergus grew bored and turned to a table covered with tools. Taking his time, Fergus picked up a carving knife, spinning it between his fingers. It was his favorite. "What should I draw on you today, pup?" Fergus asked with a cruel grin. "Screw you," Kaelen spat, the defiance clearly coming from the wolf inside him. Fergus laughed, his grin turning cold. "You shouldn't have said that," he replied, stopping the blade's spin and pressing it against Kaelen's chest. Slowly he pierced the skin, pushing the knife deeper, slicing through muscle as he carved intricate patterns. Kaelen gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. He wouldn't give Fergus the satisfaction, but the pain was unbearable, and Fergus grew frustrated. He wanted to hear Kaelen's cries. Fergus's irritation wasn't just about Kaelen. His pack was stressing him out, especially now that he had taken a mate. Having a mate meant his wolf was loyal to her, so he needed to get rid of the mortal women he had kept as pets. It annoyed him, but it had to be done. "Well, you're lucky today, pup," Fergus said, stepping back. "I'm done with you for now. I've got things to do before the full moon." He unlocked Kaelen's chains, letting him collapse to the ground, then left the cell, locking it behind him. Fergus walked down the row of cages to where the mortal women were kept. He opened the last cell, where 3 women cowered. The first was short, with curly light brown hair and haunted brown eyes. The second was slightly taller, with wavy blonde hair and chocolate-colored eyes. The last woman was the tallest. with straight black hair and stormy blue eyes. "Won't you raise your own boss to chess?" "Get up, you whores. Time to go," Fergus said harshly, fastening collars around their necks and dragging them outside. Before leaving, he glanced back at Kaeren. "Have fun with your first shift, Pop," Fergus said with a cruel laugh, slamming the door behind him as he dragged the women away. Once outside, Fergus shifted into his silver-grey wolf form and attacked the women, making quick work of them. The full moon's pull had heightened his bloodlust. Satisfied, Fergus trotted back to his pack, where his mate and the rest of the wolves waited. Kaeren sat in his cage, watching his wounds heal rapidly. Suddenly, a hissing noise caught his attention. Across the room, a tall, tanned man transformed into a massive lion with a black and tawny mane and glowing amber eyes. Kaeren looked around in awe as most of the captives shifted into were-creatures. There was another wolf, but the rest were all types of big cats. Only 2 pale figures with a strange, sweet scent remained human. The other creatures lay on the cold maricel, or, their eyes fixed on Kaeren, they seemed to be waiting for something. Pain surged through Kaelen's body, sharp and searing. He looked at his arms and saw black fur sprouting. He wanted to fight it, but the pain was too much. With a hiss, he let the transformation take over. Kaeren stumbled forward on 4 large black paws. His wolf was a deep black, with a silver-tipped tail and fierce golden eyes. He sat down, exhausted, ready to sleep. But the wolf inside him had other plans. A powerful howl burst from Kaelen's throat, echoing through the room. The other creatures stepped back, lowering their heads in respect. Kaelen's wolf had claimed his place as their new alpha. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 3. 30 years had passed since Fergus locked Kaeren away, though time meant little to someone who wasn't counting it. At the moment, Fergus stood outside his and his mate's room, waiting nervously. Inside, his mate was giving birth to their 4th pup. She had already given him 3 sons, and Fergus was hoping for another boy. His mate's screams echoed through the room, but then they stopped. The pack's healer appeared, signalling for Fergus to come in. "What have you given me this time?" Fergus demanded, his eyes narrowing at the squirming bundle in his mate's arms. "A daughter, finally," his mate said with a soft smile, looking lovingly at the baby girl. "Well, since I already have 3 sons, I'll let this one pass," Fergus said coldly, his tone sharp. "But the next one better be a boy. I won't have another pup unless you free all those poor creatures you've been keeping locked up," his mate snapped, her voice full of anger as she glared at him. "What are you talking about?" Fergus asked, his voice calm, though a vein bulged in his neck. "Don't play dumb with me. I know you've been keeping them against their will. Let them go, or I'll tell the entire pack," she yelled. "Fine, Victoria," Fergus growled, his anger barely contained. "But remember, the next one better be a boy." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Kaeren sat in his cell, thinking about the other captives and why they had been disappearing. Nearby, the were-lion he had first seen transform was deep in thought. "Hey, Wolf, why do you think everyone's gone?" the lion asked, his ears twitching as he listened for any sign of their captor. "I don't know," Kaeren replied miserably, "but I think they've all been disposed of." The lion frowned, his amber eyes dimming with sadness. "My name's Raziel. What's yours, Wolf?" he asked thoughtfully, as though trying to recall what Fergus had called him other than pup. "Kaeren," he said softly. "It's a shame we're only learning each other's names now, after all these years." A quiet stillness settled over them as they sat in their cages, lost in thought. The silence broke when the barn door creaked open. Fergus's angry muttering reached their ears. All right, Pup and Lion, you're the last ones. I'll let you go together, Fergus hissed, stepping into the room. He chained both Kaelen and Raziel and dragged them outside into the chilly night air. This is our chance to escape, Raziel whispered to Kaelen, his voice barely audible. I'll distract him. You shift and take him down. True to his word, Raziel began speaking loudly to Fergus. So, Mutt, what brings us out on this fine evening? Fergus, clearly irritated, snapped back. My mate refuses to give me another heir unless I get rid of you too. Raziel tilted his head toward Kaelen, signaling him to act. Kaelen shifted into his black wolf form, the silver tip of his tail catching the moonlight. He lunged at Fergus, clamping his powerful jaws around the werewolf's neck and biting down hard. With a sharp jerk, Kaelen tore Fergus's head from his body and leapt away, watching as Fergus's lifeless form crumpled to the ground. Kaelen turned to Raziel, tilting his head in a silent question. What now? Bite off my collar and I'll shift to get yours. Then we'll head to the next state for food and clothes, Raziel said with a chuckle, motioning to the metal shackle around his neck. Kaelen nodded and bit into Raziel's iron collar, shattering it. Once free, Raziel shifted into his lion form, his tawny coat and thick black mane shining under the moonlight. Standing slightly taller than Kaelen, Raziel used his powerful jaws to break Kaelen's collar. The wolf and lion set off together, running into the night. They didn't realize it yet, but they were headed toward Kaelen's home state. Along the way, Raziel caught the scent of prey, his stomach growling painfully. Kaelen smelled it too. Raziel flicked his tail, signaling Kaelen to follow. After about 20 minutes, they came across a herd of bison. Raziel crouched low, his ears swiveling as he planned the hunt. He huffed softly at Kaelen, who instinctively knew what to do. Kaelen circled the herd, moving carefully to avoid making noise. When he was in position, he raised his tail slightly, the silver tip visible to Raziel. Then he charged into the clearing, herding the bison toward the waiting lion. Raziel waited patiently, then sprang at a large bull bison, sinking his teeth into its neck. Kaelen leapt onto its back, biting into its spine. Together they brought the massive creature down. The two were creatures feasted on their kill, scanning the area for danger. Kaelen was surprised to find he enjoyed the taste of red meat. Raziel, on the other hand, ate with gusto, unsure when his next meal would come. Suddenly, Raziel shifted back into his human form and motioned for Kaelen to do the same. Kaelen complied, sitting beside the remains of their prey. Both men felt awkward about being naked, but didn't mention it. "Why'd you shift back?" Kaelen asked, tearing a piece of meat from the carcass. "Before we go any further, you need to learn about the laws of the supernatural world," Raziel said, sitting across from him. "What do I need to know?" Kaelen asked, tilting his head. "Well, as a werewolf, you need to understand packs, alphas, mates, rogues, slayers, and other supernatural beings," Raziel explained, counting each on his fingers. "Let's start with packs and alphas," Kaelen suggested, taking another bite of meat. "All right. Subordinate wolves are naturally drawn to alphas. Packs form when betters and subordinates find a leader they trust. The alpha is responsible for the pack's safety, land, and well-being. Betters, who are second in command, help maintain order. Most packs have multiple betters. Since you were turned by an alpha, you now have alpha strength, which makes you one too," Raziel said, adjusting his position to get comfortable. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 4. "So, the next thing to learn is about mates, right?" Kaelen asked, tilting his head curiously. "Yes, mates," Raziel began with a small smile. "Every supernatural being has a mate. They're like the missing piece of our soul. We aren't truly whole until we've found them. For some, it doesn't take long after reaching maturity to find their mate and settle down for a happy life. But for others, it can take much longer. sometimes centuries, since we can live 10 human lifetimes or more. When you find your mate, you won't want anyone else, because your wolf will be entirely loyal to her and only her. Most mates are of the same species, but it's rare, yet possible, for mates to be of different species or even human. Kaeren listened intently, though his expression showed some confusion. So, will I get a mate too? He asked, his eyes lighting up with hope. Flecks of gold shimmered in his irises, a sign his wolf was paying close attention. Yes, you'll be gifted a mate, Raziel replied with a far-off look. But neither of us will know her species until you meet her. Have you met your mate? Kaeren asked, unable to hold back his curiosity. No, Raziel answered with a shake of his head. Before I was captured, I was about 25 and there was no sign of her. Judging by the number of full moons I've endured with Fergus and his father, I'd say I'm around 75 now. Kaelin's eyes widened. You only look 27, he exclaimed, astonished. Razia chuckled softly. Where lions age slowly. I still have about 800 years ahead of me, as do most supernatural creatures. Do you have any idea how old I might be? Kaeren asked, recalling he was around 20 when he left home. I'd guess you're about 50 now, though you look closer to 24, Razia observed, studying Kaelin's features, which had sharpened and matured over the years. 50, ha ha, Kaeren murmured. His thoughts drifted to the family he'd left behind, his brother and sister more than his parents. Shaking his head, he asked, So, what's next? Rogues? Yes, rogues, Raziel replied, his tone shifting as he began explaining. There are different kinds. Nomads are creatures designed to live on the move, like most wercats, though lions live in prides. Nomadic shifters usually travel alone or in small groups, only stopping when the female is pregnant. Once the offspring can keep up, it follows its parents until it's mature enough to find its own mate, which could take centuries. Lone wolves, on the other hand, leave their packs by choice, searching for a new one. They travel alone until they find a pack to join. Then there are rogues, supernaturals who have committed crimes against their kind or other species. True rogues, the dangerous ones, have black eyes, a sign they've killed their kin or an innocent being. Raziel growled, his voice deep with anger as he mentioned the black-eyed rogue. That's a lot to take in, Kaeren admitted, tilting his head in thought. Is confusing at first, but you get used to it as you encounter nomads, loners, and rogues, Raziel assured him with a chuckle. He noted how Kaelin's boyish features had hardened into those of a strong man over the years. So, slayers are next, right? Kaeren asked, recalling the fear in Raziel's voice when he'd first mentioned them. Yes, Raziel said grimly, his face darkening. You need to know about them. Okay, explain, Kaeren urged, watching as Raziel's expression shifted with pain and fear. Slayers are mortal women trained to eliminate savage or crazed immortals. They drink a special elixir 3 times which grants them immortality. Slayers are trained for at least 10 years before being sent into the field, and their abilities can surpass ours. The elixir also keeps them in the body of a fit 20-year-old, but are they really that dangerous? Kaeren asked, doubtful. Yes, Raziel replied with a heavy sigh. When I was a young lion, my pride was attacked. One of our members had gone rogue, killing 30 innocent people and turning 10 into lions against their will. The slayers killed him, but my pride elders were also killed for protecting him. Afterward, my uncle blamed me and exiled me. That's when Fergus's father captured me. I'm sorry that happened, Kaeren said softly, offering sympathy. Raziel shrugged. Enough of that. You still need to learn about other supernatural creatures, he said with a small smile. Are there many? Kaeren asked, his ears perking up. Yes, Raziel began listing them. There are werewolves, vampires, demons, half-demons, angels, half-angels, dwarfs, elves, werecats like lions, tigers, leopards, cheetahs, witches, centaurs, fairies, golems, goblins, dragons, zombies, sirens, shapeshifters, phoenixes, banshees, gnomes, ghosts, mermaids, bird-shifters, and many more. Wow, Kaeren said, his mind racing as he imagined each creature. Now that you know the basics, let's keep moving. There's a small town nearby where we can get clothes and supplies, Razel said, standing and stretching. Kaeren followed his lead, stretching his muscles as he scented the air. Something about the path ahead felt familiar, but he ignored it. Raziel shifted into his lion form, flicking his tail at Kaeren, who snorted and shifted into his black wolf form. Together they headed toward civilization. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 5. As Raziel and Kaeren approached the town, Kaeren suddenly realized it was the place where he had been born. The town where his brother and sister lived with their families. He wasn't sure if his parents were still alive. As they got closer, soft whimpers escaped Kaelen's lips without him noticing, until Raziel gently bumped his side with his head. Kaeren let out a low whine, memories of the harsh words and beatings he had endured here, Marisol oding back to him. Raziel could sense Kaelen's distress. The air around Kaeren was thick with fear, sadness, anger, and hesitation, all emotions that Raziel could easily smell. Stopping, Raziel shifted back into his human form, with Kaeren following a moment later. "Do you know where we are, Kaeren?" Raziel asked, placing a hand on his shoulder as Kaeren continued to let out soft, involuntary whimpers. "Yes," Kaeren answered quietly. "This is where I grew up." Raziel watched Kaelen's shoulders slump and said gently, "I take it your childhood wasn't a happy one?" "No, it wasn't," Kaeren replied, his voice tight. "My father was abusive, and my mother ignored me. My brother and sister moved away, leaving me behind with them." A growl rumbled in his chest as his wolf stirred, wanting vengeance for the suffering his human side had endured. Raziel didn't press further, sensing words wouldn't help. Instead, he changed the subject. "We'll need to find some clothes on a washing line." "Without getting caught, so we can walk into town without drawing too much attention," he said with a light chuckle, scanning nearby houses. Kaeren followed Raziel toward 2 homes on the town's outskirts. Each had washing lines full of clothes. Kaeren watched in awe as Raziel used his supernatural speed to grab 2 sets of clothing, including shoes and even underwear. "Here," Raziel said, handing over a pair of trousers, a shirt and shoes. "They might be a tight fit, but they'll do for now." The 2 quickly put on the stolen clothes and headed toward the town. As they walked down the streets, curious stares followed them. The townsfolk gawked openly, whispering to one another. Kaeren noticed Raziel slip away, taking advantage of the distraction. A couple of minutes later, he returned with a pocket full of coins and a few bills. Together they walked into a diner at the edge of town and ordered tea and coffee. Once seated with their drinks, the attention from the townspeople faded, allowing them to talk in peace. "So, where will you go after this, Kaeren?" Raziel asked, a note of genuine concern in his voice. "You're not coming with me?" Kaeren asked, unease creeping into his chest. "No," Raziel said softly. "I need to find my kind and rejoin a pride." Kaelen sighed. "I think I'll head north, toward the snow-covered regions," he said thoughtfully. "That's a good place for wolves," Razumov replied. "But not for lions. We're used to the warmth." "I suppose so," Kaelen agreed. "I want to find my own path. Thank you for everything you've done for me." "You've done just as much for me," Raziel said with gratitude. If it weren't for you, we'd both still be trapped. He referred to Kaeren killing Fergus. Let's just say we helped each other, Kaeren said, finishing his tea. With a nod, Raziel stood. This is goodbye, then. Here's some money to get you started, he said, placing coins on the table and handing Kaeren some notes. He gave Kaeren a pat on the back before leaving the diner. Kaeren stayed seated, preparing to leave, when a familiar scent hit him. It was stronger than he remembered. Walking to the door, he reached for the handle just as it swung open. A middle-aged woman stepped inside, with 2 teenage daughters and 2 identical younger girls. Kaeren froze in shock. It was his sister, Celeste, and her daughters. "Kaeren, is that you?" Celeste exclaimed, staring at him in disbelief. She hadn't seen her younger brother in 30 years. To her, time had been kind to him. He was no longer thin and frail, and his eyes carried stories of hardship she couldn't imagine. "Yes, Celeste, it's me," Kaeren replied cautiously, afraid his sister might burst into tears if he spoke too loudly. "Oh my, where have you been all this time? I missed you so much," Celeste cried, rushing forward to hug him tightly. "I've been with a friend," Kaeren half lied. He couldn't bring himself to tell her he'd spent 3 decades as a prisoner. "Well, come sit down. We have so much to talk about," Celeste said eagerly, leading him to a booth with her daughters. Kaeren smiled warmly at the girls. "And who are these lovely young ladies?" he asked, trying to show them he wasn't a threat. "These are my daughters," Celeste said proudly. "This is Arlena, she's 19. Sorel is 18. And these are my twins, Tiana and Soraya. They're 15. Celeste pointed to each daughter in turn. Arlena had long, raven-black hair, striking green eyes, and flawless tan skin. Sorel, with blonde hair and deep brown eyes, had a porcelain complexion. The twins, Tiana and Soraya, shared light brown hair, dark blue eyes, and matching sapphire dresses that reached their mid-shins. "It's a pleasure to meet all of you. I'm your Uncle Kaeren," he said, extending his hand. Each girl shook it in turn. "You've changed so much since I last saw you," Celeste said, her eyes scanning him for what felt like the 15th time. She still couldn't believe how much he had filled out. "Not all the years have been kind," Kaeren replied, pulling his arms off the table as Alina brought a tray of pastries and sandwiches. Sorel followed with drinks. "Well, that's in the past now," Celeste said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I suppose so. How has life treated you?" Kaeren asked, genuinely curious. "Life has been good. I have a wonderful husband and 7 children, 3 sons and 4 daughters. Our brother is doing well, too. He has 9 kids with his wife. Mum is still alive, but Dad passed a year after you left," Celeste said, sadness creeping into her voice. Kaelen's heart sank. "Wait, you have 3 sons? Our brother has 9 kids, and Dad is gone? How is Mum?" "Yes, my sons are Blaze, 22, Erindor, 20, and Silric, 17. Our brother has 6 sons and 3 daughters, ranging from 25 to 14, including 2 sets of fraternal twins. Mum has been doing much better since Dad passed. You should see her before you leave town," Celeste said, placing a comforting hand on his arm. Kaelen nodded, thanking his sister. He decided he would visit his mother and brother before heading north. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 6. As Kaelen walked down the streets toward his mother's house, he noticed even more people staring. Word had clearly spread from the diner about who he was. He tried to keep his head down, avoiding eye contact, but the wolf inside him refused to allow any sign of submission. So he walked tall, his head held high, even as the tension in his chest grew. He turned off the main road and onto a narrow path that led to the cottage where he had once lived with his parents. Reaching the door, Kaelen raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door opened. Standing there was his mother. She looked much older than he remembered, but there was no mistaking who she was. "Oh, Kaelen, my sweet boy, you've grown so much. Where have you been?" she said, her voice trembling as tears ran freely down her face. "I can't say. You wouldn't be able to handle it," Kaelen replied, studying her face, trying to gauge her true emotions. Come in. We have so much to talk about," she said, ushering him into the small cottage and closing the door behind them. They entered the living room, and Kaelen suppressed a low growl as old memories began to surface. He looked around, surprised to see how different the house felt. The stale, rancid smell of the past was gone. Beer bottles no longer littered the Marizelle, and the bloodstains he remembered had been cleaned. New furniture filled the space, and the air smelled warm and inviting. "Sit down. I'll make us some tea and we can talk," his mother said softly as she headed into the kitchen. Kaelen sat on the light purple couch, glancing around the room. Photos of his sister, her husband, and their children lined the walls, alongside pictures of his brother and his family. He realized there was no trace of Dregan left in the house. The man who had brought him so much pain seemed to have been erased from their lives. His mother returned with a tray holding a teapot, cups, milk, and sugar. She set it on the coffee table and settled into the chair across from him. "What do you want to talk about?" Kaelen asked as she handed him a cup of tea. "I want to talk about how you came into this world," she said, her tone heavy with regret. "What about it?" Kaelen asked, his voice cautious. Uh, you know Dregan isn't your real father," she admitted with a sigh. "It crossed my mind. He used to mumble it when he was drunk," Kaelen replied coldly. "I think it's time you knew the truth," his mother said, her voice full of remorse. "And I want to explain why I lied. It would be good to know before I leave town," Kaelen said smoothly, finishing his tea and placing the empty cup on the table. "Your father's name is Frederick. He was a traveler passing through town and needed a place to stay. Your brother was away camping with Dregan, and I was home with your sister, who was just a toddler. Dregan was an abusive man, and I had been forced to marry him after he paid off my parents to end my engagement to someone else. But 2 children, Dregan became sterile from his drinking. He didn't know, though, and insisted we keep trying for another child. I invited Frederick to stay the night. We drank too much, and one thing led to another. He left the next day, and I never saw him again. When I started showing signs of pregnancy, I told Dregan the baby was his. Frederick wrote me once, apologizing for what happened. Dregan found the letter when you were 8. In a drunken rage, he beat me for not telling him the truth, and then turned his anger on you. From that day on, he was even more brutal. After you ran away, Dregan drank himself to death. I always hoped you'd survived, and now that you're here, I'm so happy to see you alive," she said sincerely. Kaelen could tell she wasn't lying. "Thank you for telling me," Kaelen said, though his tone was tinged with bitterness. "But I wasn't truly alive. I was imprisoned for 30 years. Her face fell. "I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can give you for your journey?" "I'll need my inheritance, a backpack, a wallet, and a few changes of clothes." "I'll be leaving in an hour," Kaelen said firmly. "Very well. Wait here while I get everything," she said, grabbing her coat and stepping out the door. Kaelen sat alone, his thoughts swirling. He had suspected from a young age that Dregan wasn't his father. The man's smell and behavior had always felt wrong. He'd been closer to his grandparents, though he doubted they were still alive. If his inheritance came from anyone, it would be from them. His mind shifted to his years of imprisonment and how it had ended. He had killed Fergus. The satisfaction he felt in that moment still lingered, though he chalked it up to the years of suffering Fergus had inflicted. An hour later, the door opened, pulling Kaelen from his dark thoughts. His mother stepped inside, carrying a bag filled with clothes. Kaelen could smell leather and the faint scent of cash coming from a wallet inside. "I've brought everything you asked for. Your grandparents always adored you, so they left you more than enough money to start fresh," she said, handing him the wallet. "Thank you, Mother. I appreciate this, but we both know this will be the last time we see each other," Kaelen said softly as she packed identical shirts, trousers, undergarments, and an extra pair of shoes into the bag. "I know," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "Please live your life fully. Don't let it end too soon." "I promise to fight for my life with everything I have," Kaelen said, slinging the bag over his shoulder. He hugged her tightly before turning and walking toward the woods, determined to forge his path. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 7. Kaelen stood on the edge of the village, deciding to return the clothes he had borrowed. He stripped them off, walked back to the garden where he had taken them, and tossed them over the fence before heading deeper into the forest. Shifting into his black wolf form with its distinctive silver-tipped tail, Kaelen was surprised to find the backpack fit snugly on his back, even as a wolf. Without hesitation, he began running, determined to stay far from Fergus's pack territory. Now, he ran for hours, his powerful legs propelling him through the wilderness until they finally gave out beneath him. Exhaustion overcame him after what he estimated to be 3 days of non-stop travel, only pausing briefly as darkness fell each night. On the third evening, he found himself near a lake with a cave to the east. Kaelen perked his ears, listening for any signs of other predators. Hearing none, he cautiously approached the lake, drinking deeply from the cool water before moving toward the cave. He sniffed the entrance, ensuring it was safe, then ventured inside. His stomach growled in protest, reminding him he needed food. Too tired to hunt properly, Kaelen decided fishing would have to suffice. Wriggling free of the backpack, he shook out his thick coat. Eating the fish raw wouldn't bother him, but he'd need a fire to dry off if he had to wade into the water. Leaving the cave, Kaelen began gathering dry sticks and grass, carrying them back in his jaws. Once he had a pile of materials, Kaelen shifted into human form. Searching the backpack's front pockets, he found a box of matches. Grateful for the time saved, he struck one match, lighting the dry grass beneath the sticks. Soon, a small fire crackled to life. Shifting back into his wolf form, Kaelen padded out of the cave toward the lake. He had no experience fishing as a wolf, but he was determined to try. Taking a deep breath, he thrust his muzzle into the water, jaws open, and waited. Just as he was running out of air, a fish swam between his teeth, and instinctively he clamped down, pulling it from the water. Proud of his catch, Kaelen carried it to the shore, holding it steady with a paw as he impaled it on a stick. Carefully placing it over the fire, he decided to catch more. After several attempts, Kaelen caught 4 additional fish. He placed them all on sticks, cooking them one by one. Once they were ready, he shifted back to his human form, blowing on the first fish to cool it before taking a bite. The taste surprised him. The cooked fish was better than he'd expected. He ate until he was full, savoring each bite. Stretching and yawning, Kaelen shifted back into his wolf form, curling up nose to tail, and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the cave, waking Kaelen. He peeked out from beneath his tail, surveying the surroundings. Everything seemed calm. Rising to his paws, he shook out his fur, adjusted the backpack on his back, and leapt out into the day, deciding he'd hunt while continuing his journey north. With his nose to the ground, Kaelen picked up the scent of blood. It belonged to a small animal. Following the trail, he discovered a wounded hare. Its scent burned his nose, and as he approached, he realized why. It had been shot. Kaelen felt a sense of duty as he ended the creature's suffering with a quick pounce. He fed on the hare, keeping an eye on his surroundings for any potential threats. As he traveled further, the air grew colder and traces of snow began to appear. Kaeren passed 2 towns during his second and third days of travel, estimating he'd reach his destination in 2 more days. The full moon would rise the next night. While moving forward, Kaeren caught the faint scent of a campfire mixed with several male scents. Among them he detected a faint feminine scent. Intrigued, he followed the trail, which quickly soured. The closer he got, the more unpleasant the smells became. Blood, urine, feces, and male release mingled with the stench of pain. Kaelen's heart sank as he realized what the woman's condition might be. Reaching her at last, the sight horrified him. The woman lay naked, her hair and body soaked in blood. Bruises marred her skin, and the signs of violence were unmistakable. She was alive, but barely. Kaeren hesitated for only a moment before deciding to save her. It would mean turning her into a werewolf, but it was her only chance. Kaeren approached her gently. She was conscious but weak, her pain evident in her glassy eyes. Lowering his head, he bit her arm deeply enough to draw blood, then bit the inside of his own cheek, allowing his blood to mix with hers. His blood would begin the healing process. She didn't scream, which worried him, but it also meant she trusted him enough to stay still. Shifting into his human form, Kaeren lifted her into his arms and carried her 4 miles to a cave at the edge of a clearing. After setting her down, he retrieved a blanket from his backpack and brought her to a nearby river to clean her wounds. Wrapping her in the blanket to keep her warm, he started a fire before heading out to hunt. Kaeren found a herd of deer and, in wolf form, took down the oldest. Carrying it back to the cave, he noticed the woman had woken. Shifting back, he used a knife from his bag to prepare some meat to cook. Once it was ready, he offered her a piece. She took it hesitantly, her face a mix of confusion and fear. "Who are you? What are you? Are you going to hurt me?" she asked, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "My name is Kaeren," he replied calmly. "I'm a werewolf. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have taken care of you. I bit you to save your life." "You mean I wasn't dreaming?" "You're that black wolf," she said, her voice trembling. Kaeren nodded in confirmation. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 8. Kaeren thought Lyric was handling the news better than he'd expected. They had spent the last hour talking about what had happened to her and the steps he had taken to save her life. He explained that he had turned her into a werewolf because she had been dying, and it was the only way to save her. He also told her that she would experience her first shift into a wolf during the full moon tomorrow night. "Did you hunt the deer yourself? You don't seem to have any weapons," Lyric asked, her curiosity clear. Kaeren realized he couldn't keep calling her woman and decided it was time to ask her name. "I caught it as a wolf," Kaeren replied with a slight tilt of his head. "And now that I think about it, I don't even know your name." "My name's Lyric Patton. I'm 18. What's yours?" she asked, taking another bite of the cooked meat he had prepared for her. "I'm Kaeren. I'm 50 years old, have been a werewolf for 30 years, and spent those years as a prisoner," Kaeren said as he began eating some of the freshly roasted venison. "You look like you're 25. How is that possible?" she asked, her face scrunched in confusion as she tried to process his age. "I didn't understand it either at first," Kaeren explained. "Werewolves age much slower than humans. Some can live up to 500 years, but many don't make it that far. The world is dangerous for us." Lyric hesitated, then asked, "What do you mean you were a prisoner?" Kaeren ran his fingers through his hair, sighing before answering, "My father. Well, the man I thought was my father always hated me. I recently learned he wasn't my real father, and when he found out, he lost it. He started beating me every day. When I was 20, I couldn't take it anymore and ran away, but I accidentally wandered onto Fergus's land. He was the alpha who turned me. After that, I was held captive in his territory for 30 years. Every single day I was tortured, with knives, fire, and other tools. Is that why you're helping me? Lyra asked, as she stretched out in the sleeping bag Kaeren had given her. Yes, my conscience. And my wolf wouldn't let me leave you like that, Kaeren replied, sniffing the air for any lingering human scents. You can communicate with your wolf, Lyric whispered, tilting her head in curiosity. Not exactly, Kaeren said. But the wolf can influence your emotions and take control when instincts are strong enough. How do you know if a wolf is strong enough to take over? Lyrette asked, her expression shifting as a new presence began pushing into her mind. It depends on the wolf's rank in the pack. I'm an alpha, Kaeren explained, noticing her eyes flash briefly, a sign her inner wolf was awakening. What rank do you think I'll be? Lulia asked through a yawn as the night sky darkened and stars filled the heavens. I think you'll be a beta, Kaeren said thoughtfully. Now, enough talk about wolves for today. What brought you to the forest alone? He asked, watching her eyelids grow heavy. Lyric hesitated before speaking. 3 days ago, I was married. It was an arranged marriage meant to benefit both families. After the ceremony, my husband, Jones, suggested a honeymoon in the next town over. We left my parents' house, and a day later 3 of his friends joined us on the journey. They started drinking when we made camp. From that point on, they ridiculed me, sexualized me, and they hurt me, she said, her voice trembling. Either they were done, they left me bleeding on the forest Maricel, and went back to their camp. I was barely conscious when you found me and saved me. That's enough for tonight. You need rest, Kaeren said gently. He watched as Lyric adjusted herself in the sleeping bag, her breathing evening out as she fell asleep. Kaeren felt an unexpected sense of connection to her, like a bond between siblings. It wasn't romantic, but his wolf had already started to protect her fiercely. Shaking off his thoughts, Kaeren shifted into his wolf form, curling up around Lyric to keep her warm. Soon he drifted into sleep. Kaeren woke early the next morning to sunlight streaming into the cave. He yawned, stretching his lean legs, only to hear a small whimper from Lyric. She had been using his body heat and his movement had disturbed her. Kaeren watched as she stirred, whining softly as the sense of the forest overwhelmed her newly sensitive nose. He shifted back into his human form, ensuring the fire was completely extinguished before rummaging through his backpack for clothes. Pulling out a pair of pants and a shirt, he also tossed a shirt and shorts to Lyric. What's the plan? Lyric asked as she dressed and snacked on some jerky Kaeren had brought. We need to keep moving. The men haven't left their camp yet and staying here too long would be risky, Kaeren replied, running a hand through his hair. But how will we travel if I can't shift yet? Lyri asked, tugging at the oversized shirt she wore. We'll walk until nightfall. When the full moon rises, it will trigger your first shift, Kaeren explained, securing his bag on his back. Together, they set off toward the north, heading into colder terrain. Kaelen's wolf growled protectively in his mind, demanding loyalty and obedience from his new beta. At the same time, it was determined to protect her fiercely. Kaeren knew he wouldn't be able to resist helping others in need if it meant growing his pack. For now, though, his wolf's primary goal was clear: finding a large, safe territory where they could start anew. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 9. Lyric felt like she and Kaeren had been walking forever. The crisp morning had turned into a scorching afternoon, which eventually gave way to a cool evening. As night approached, her body began to change. She felt her bones tingling, her skin burning, and her nerves buzzing to life. Her stomach fluttered as though butterflies were swirling inside. Walking beside Kaeren, the werewolf who had saved her life, she couldn't help but feel deeply grateful. Her loyalty to him was unwavering, even though they had only known each other for a day. Night is approaching. We should rest before the moon rises, Kaeren said, coming to a stop. "Oh, thank goodness, we've been walking all day," Lyric groaned, Maricel pinking onto the forest Maricel or Carlton and rubbing her aching feet. Kaelen chuckled and sat beside her. "We should get some sleep. We'll be running all night once we shift," Kaelen said, lying down on the ground and gazing at the sky as it transitioned to dusk. "All right, see you in a few hours," Lyric replied, settling in on the ground as well. In the quiet of the forest, both drifted into a peaceful sleep. Lyric woke 2 hours later, her body consumed by a fiery pain. It felt like her skin was being pierced by hundreds of tiny needles, while her blood bubbled as if it were molten lava. Looking around, she saw Kaelen watching her with concern. "What's happening to me?" Lyric whispered, her voice trembling with agony. "You're shifting. Don't fight it. Let it happen naturally," Kaelen said softly. But even his gentle voice felt harsh to her sensitive ears, and she let out a small whine. Taking his advice, Lyric stopped resisting the change, and the intense pain transformed into a light tingling. Her bones began to snap and reshape. Her hands and feet morphed into paws. Fur sprouted from her skin, her ears elongated, her face stretched into a muzzle, and her teeth sharpened. When the transformation was complete, Lyric stood, panting as a wolf, her body trembling from the effort. "You're stunning. Would you like to know what you look like?" Kaelen asked. Lyric nodded her head, still catching her breath. "You're a sandy brown wolf with a black muzzle and silver tips on your ears and tail," Kaelen said with a smile. He quickly removed his clothes, gathered the ones Lyric had been wearing, and stuffed them into his backpack. Tossing the bag onto his back, he shifted into his black wolf form with the silver-tipped tail. The dynamic between them changed instantly. Being in wolf form with another wolf was entirely different from being with a lion. Kaelen felt an overwhelming urge to protect Lyric and could sense her unwavering loyalty to him as her alpha. Kaelen stepped closer, resting his head on top of hers. In that moment, an unbreakable bond formed between them. He tilted his head back and let out a powerful howl, which Lyric joined. Then he led her through the forest, their paws pounding against the earth as they ran side by side. Lyric kept pace effortlessly, her smaller frame allowing her to move quickly and turn sharply. The two wolves sprinted through the forest, their breaths mingling with the cool night air. They leapt over fallen trees and navigated rocky terrain, running until they came across a large herd of deer. Kaelen nudged Lyric's shoulder with a low whine. She looked over her shoulder at him, whining in return as her stomach growled. Kaelen snorted in amusement and gave a short yip, motioning toward the herd with his head. "What?" Lyric nodded, understanding the plan. They split up, flanking the herd from opposite sides. Kaelen crouched low on the left, while Lyric mirrored his movements on the right. Both crept forward quietly, careful not to alert the deer. As they closed in, the herd grew uneasy, sensing danger. Suddenly, both wolves charged. Kaelen aimed straight for a killing blow, while Lyric leapt onto a deer's back, avoiding its antlers. Together they brought down the animal, their coordinated attack cementing their bond as a pack. The remaining deer scattered, leaving Kaelen and Lyric alone with their kill in the clearing. They ate until their bellies were full, unable to move from the weight of their feast. Once satisfied, they searched for a safe place to rest. Kaelen led Lyric to a nest of thick thistles, large enough for both of them to lie comfortably. Curling around each other for warmth, they drifted into a deep, contented sleep. The next morning, Kaelen woke in his wolf form, still curled protectively around Lyric. She groggily opened her eyes and stretched, her fur glinting in the sunlight. Kaelen marveled at the unique pattern of her coat before standing and shaking out his fur. Crawling out of the thistles, he waited for Lyric to join him. Once she emerged, Kaelen shifted into his human form, quickly pulling on his clothes. "To shift back, you need to picture yourself as a human," Kaelen instructed. Lyric nodded and focused. Moments later, she returned to her human form. Kaelen tossed her a shirt and shorts, which she put on quickly. "Where are we going now?" Lyra asked, smoothing down her shirt. There's a town a few miles from here, Kaeren explained as he adjusted the straps of his backpack. My inheritance includes a log cabin about a mile outside of the town. It used to belong to my grandparents, and now it's mine. How long will it take to get there? Lirabeth asked, falling into step beside him as they began walking north, following the faint scent of civilization. A steady pace in human form. We should reach it by noon, Kaeren said. Together they set off toward the town, walking side by side. The forest around them was alive with sounds. Leaves crunching underfoot, birds chirping and the distant calls of other animals. The bond between them felt unshakable, and for the first time in a long while, Kaeren felt hopeful about what lay ahead. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 10. Kaeren and Lyric stepped out of the forest and made their way through the alleys toward the office where Kaeren needed to claim the key to his log cabin. As they walked through the small town, they noticed the limited number of people and the sparse houses scattered around. They passed by the marshal's station before arriving at one of the town's largest buildings, second only to the church. They entered the stone structure and all eyes turned toward them. Whispers broke out among the people inside, and Kaeren could feel the beast within him bristling at their judgmental stares. Lyric felt it too, her wolf ready to lash out. Ignoring the murmurs, Kaeren strode straight to the desk at the front. Good day. My name is Kaeren Superior, and I'm here to collect the key to a log cabin about a mile from here. I inherited it from my grandparents, Kaeren said curtly, his irritation obvious due to the comments directed at Lyric. He knew they didn't look their best, wearing dirty clothes and no shoes. But that didn't give anyone the right to gossip. Ah yes, Mr. Superior, the clerk said, his tone hesitant. We've been expecting you. Though I must say the journey here is difficult without horses, and I didn't hear any with you. His suspicious glances didn't go unnoticed by either Kaeren or Lyrith. Well, we don't have all day, Kaeren said impatiently, tapping his foot and crossing his arms, his coiled muscles adding to the effect. Of course, right away, Mr. Superior, the clerk stammered, quickly searching through a series of pigeonholes for the key. His nervous demeanor betrayed his unease, which Kaeren noticed with a hint of satisfaction. The man's hands trembled as he handed over the key. Thank you, Kaeren said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. The wolf within him preened at the man's obvious fear. Do you need assistance finding your way? The clerk asked, his gaze darting nervously between Kaeren and Lyric. His discomfort grew under Lyric's sharp stare, which lingered on him a second too long. Kaeren could tell her wolf was close to surfacing, her claws and fangs elongating slightly. He gently grabbed her arm to calm her, earning a sheepish glance from her as she reined herself in. Oh, just point us in the right direction, Kaeren said firmly. The cabin is about 1.5 miles west of the village, the clerk replied hurriedly, eager to get rid of them. Kaeren tipped his head in acknowledgement before leading Lyrich out of the building. They walked back toward the forest, heading west. I'm sorry, Alpha, Lyri said softly once they were far from the town. She avoided his eyes, her shoulders slumped in guilt. I almost lost control. It's all right, Kaeren reassured her. You didn't attack anyone, and that's what matters. Also, you don't need to call me Alpha. Sister is fine. Lyric looked up at him, her admiration and respect clear in her gaze. They continued walking along a path that led toward the cabin. Kaeren made a mental note to remove the path eventually, not wanting to make it easy for anyone to find the property. When they reached the cabin, Lyric gasped. It blended seamlessly with the forest, its polished wooden walls adorned with vines dotted with small Maricel wers. The cabin was larger than she had expected, and radiated a sense of warmth and homeliness. Kaeren retrieved the key from his pocket and unlocked the door. They entered a small hallway that opened into a spacious living area. The room had a fireplace, though it lacked wood and coal. Two light blue couches faced each other with dark blue throw pillows. A wooden coffee table with a vase of artificial Maricel wurs sat between them. Moving into the kitchen, they found a dark oak dining table with 6 chairs. The kitchen itself was well equipped, with numerous cupboards, a stove, and a kettle for boiling water. Kaeren opened the cupboards and was surprised to find them fully stocked with canned goods, utensils, and cooking supplies. They explored the upstairs, finding 4 bedrooms. Kaeren recalled visiting the cabin as a child, relishing the time away from his father. After checking the rooms, they reconvened on the landing. "I found some women's clothes in the wardrobe of the largest bedroom. Is it all right if I change into them?" Lyric asked, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Of course. I plan to change into the men's clothing I found there," Kaeren replied. He watched as Lyric hurried off to change while he entered another room to do the same. As he dressed, he couldn't help but wonder why the house was so well prepared. His grandparents had always been meticulous, but this seemed almost excessive. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of hoofbeats. Listening closely, he heard shouting from 3 men and the creak of a wagon. Kaelen's stomach churned as he heard one of them mention a woman named Lyric. A low, guttural growl erupted from the room Lyric was in. Kaeren rushed downstairs just as Lyric stumbled out of her room, shifting into her sandy-colored wolf form. She let out a mournful howl that sent a pang through Kaelen's chest, but her sorrow quickly turned to rage. Her growls grew feral as she sprang into the forest with incredible speed. Kaeren caught the sound of hoofbeats growing louder and the faint growls of Lyric stalking the men. Hastily removing his clothes, Kaeren shifted into his black wolf form and bolted after her. He had to reach her before she acted on her anger. If she killed those men, it would bring slayers to their doorstep, and he couldn't allow that to happen. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 11. Lyric's vision was clouded with red as she closed in on her targets. The man who called himself her husband and his friends had stolen something precious from her, and now she was determined to make them pay. She licked her lips, eager to sink her teeth into their flesh and watch the fear in their eyes as they faced their doom. Reaching the perimeter of where the men were walking, Lyric circled them a few times, carefully selecting her first target. Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her and caught Kaelen's scent. She knew this was her moment. Stepping out of the tree line, her sudden appearance startled the 3 horses, sending them into a frenzy. The men struggled to calm the animals, their focus on the panicking horses. Sensing the danger wasn't directed at them, the horses bolted into the forest, avoiding the werewolves they could smell nearby. Their abrupt departure left the 3 men sprawled on the ground. "What's going on? Why did the horses run off?" Lyria's so-called husband shouted, his voice laced with confusion and fear. Lyric growled low in her throat, beginning to circle the men. Her piercing eyes locked onto them, and they returned her gaze with wary, terrified expressions. "I've never seen a wolf that big before. What do you think it wants?" Benny asked, his eyes glued to Lyric as he whispered to his companions. Their bickering grated on Lyric's nerves. With a snarl, she lunged at the man who hadn't spoken, knocking him flat. Pinning him down, she bared her teeth, ready to sink them into his neck and taste his blood. Before she could make her kill, a powerful force knocked her off the man. Spinning around, Lyria growled at Kaeren, her anger directed at her alpha. These men deserved to die for what they had done to her, and she couldn't understand why he would stop her. Kaeren, who had been watching from the shadows, knew her pain, but also understood the consequences. Though he shared her anger, he couldn't allow her actions to bring trouble, especially not the kind of trouble that might attract slayers. Lyric wasn't ready to give up and lunged at the men again. Kaeren tackled her, his alpha wolf asserting dominance. Though his wolf disapproved of her defiance, he was willing to overlook it, knowing the emotional turmoil Lyric was experiencing. Grabbing her scruff with his teeth, Kaeren dragged her away, keeping the men within earshot to monitor their movements. By the time Kaeren got Lyric back to the cabin, they had both shifted back into human form. Picking up their discarded clothes, they dressed and faced each other. "Why did you stop me? I could have ended them," Lyria snapped, pacing back and forth, her frustration evident. "I stopped you because if you had killed them, they wouldn't have returned to their families. Their disappearance would spark an investigation, and we'd risk drawing slayers to us. We've just regained our freedom. We can't jeopardize that," Kaeren explained, meeting her angry gaze head-on. "I know you're right," Lyra admitted, her breathing uneven. "But I was so angry. The rage took over and I couldn't think straight. I understand it's difficult, especially with them so close, but you need to be stronger. Prove you're the superior creature. Now, to help channel your bloodlust, go hunt a deer for stew, but stay far away from those men. Do you understand?" Kaeren commanded firmly. "Yes, Alpha," Lyric replied, her voice steadying. Shifting back into her wolf form, she disappeared into the forest in search of prey. Lyric wove through the trees, her rage simmering beneath the surface. She stayed far from the men, but couldn't suppress the desire to tear into them. The animals around her sensed her fury and kept their distance. Even in her heightened state, she moved silently, her focus sharp. Eventually she found a herd of deer and circled them, selecting her target. Her keen eyes spotted an old buck with a lame leg. Licking her lips in anticipation, Lyra crouched low, her muscles coiling as she prepared to strike. At the core of a crow, she sprang forward, ignoring the rest of the herd and heading straight for the injured buck. In a few powerful strides she reached her prey. Avoiding its sharp antlers, she leapt onto its back. The buck's weakened leg gave way under her weight and it collapsed. Lyric wasted no time, sinking her teeth into its neck. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as the buck thrashed weakly before succumbing to death. Letting out a triumphant howl, Lyric watched the rest of the herd scatter into the trees. "Dear!" Gripping the buck's neck, she began dragging it back to the cabin, her sandy fur stained red with blood. When she arrived, Kaeren was sitting by a fire, a pot of water simmering over it. The aroma of vegetables filled the air. Dropping the buck near Kaeren, Lyric walked to the nearby stream to wash the blood from her fur. She shifted back into her human form and dressed in the clothes she had left earlier. Joining Kaeren by the fire, she sat down beside him. "I see your hunt went well, but this deer looks healthy. We shouldn't take animals in good condition," Kaeren said as he began carving the buck into smaller pieces. "He was lame in 2 legs. He wouldn't have survived the winter. I did the herd a favor," Lyric replied sharply, watching as Kaeren added some of the meat to the stew. After their meal, they settled into their respective bedrooms for the night. Though a passing train woke them briefly in the early hours, they both decided to sleep a little longer. Tomorrow, they planned to head into town to see if they could secure jobs and start building their new lives. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent, interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 12. Kaeren woke up the next morning to the inviting aroma of food wafting through the air. Stretching, he climbed out of the bed he would soon call his own, tidied it, and got dressed for the day. He descended the stairs, following the smell to the kitchen, where he found Lyric humming a cheerful tune as she cooked eggs, bacon, sausages, and fried bread. "Good morning, Alpha Kaeren. How do you like your eggs, scrambled or fried?" Lyrial asked, plating some of the food she had prepared. "Scrambled, please. Did you sleep well?" Kaeren replied as he moved toward the table. Lyric finished her task and set 2 plates on the table before joining him. "I slept fine until the train pulling into town woke me up," Lyric said as they both began eating their breakfast. "A train? I didn't hear it," Kaeren responded. Then again, after years in a dungeon, you learn to tune out most noises. It makes sense, Lyria whispered, her tone uncertain. But I can't shake the bad feeling I have about that train. We'll check it out when we head into town, Kaeren assured her. We need to see if we can find work. I'll offer to hunt for the village, and maybe they'll consider hiring you as a teacher. Lyric nodded in agreement. After finishing their meal, they washed their dishes and left the cabin, making their way toward the town. As they walked along the path, the forest animals scurried out of their way, instinctively avoiding the two predators. Once they arrived, Kaeren and Lyric decided to split up. Kaeren headed to the Hunters Guild while Lyric made her way to the school to inquire about teaching. They agreed to meet later to investigate the mysterious circus being set up on the outskirts of town. Kaeren resisted the urge to look back at Lyric as he approached the Hunters Guild. Pushing open the door, he stepped inside and was met with the sight of burly men armed with rifles and various hunting tools. Their stares bore into him, making the beast within him restless. He ignored them, heading straight to the front desk. As the door swung shut, the piano that had stopped playing upon his entrance resumed, and the men returned to their conversations. "Looking for work, friend?" the desk clerk asked, glancing up from his papers. At that moment, a petite woman emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of food and drinks. "So what if I am? Do you have something for me?" Kaeren asked, raising an eyebrow as the clerk polished his glasses with a handkerchief. "Actually, yes. A client needs 4 bison delivered in the next 3 hours. Can you handle that?" the clerk asked, handing Kaeren a flyer with the job details and payment. "I can handle it," Kaeren replied calmly, holding back a growl as he heard the other hunters chuckling. "Good. There's a cart out back you can use. Be careful. Some of the hunters around here are just passing through, but others are locals." "Thanks for the warning," Kaeren said dryly before heading out. He retrieved a horse from the stables and hitched it to the cart. Steering it into the forest, he found a spot near the river and left the cart there while he went hunting. Kaeren efficiently took down 4 bison, tied them together and loaded them onto the cart. By the time he returned to the village, he still had time to spare. After returning the horse to the stable, much to the relief of the stable boy, Kaeren dragged the bison carcasses into the Hunters Guild. The clerk looked surprised to see him back so quickly. "I've got all 4, Kaeren said flatly as the clerk inspected the bison. There were no wounds, as Kaeren had suffocated each one. "It was impressive. Here's your advance payment," the clerk said, handing Kaeren some coins. "You'll get the rest when the client arrives. Why not have a drink while you wait?" he suggested, slapping Kaeren on the back before returning to his desk. Kaeren sat with the other hunters, listening to their tales of adventure and triumph. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of connection with others, filling a void he hadn't realized was there. Meanwhile, Lyric had reached the school just as the children were let out for recess. She approached a woman supervising the playground, who directed her to the headmistress's office. As she walked through the building, her nerves grew with each step. Reaching the door, she knocked, and it was opened by a petite, curvy woman with wavy brown hair tied in a ponytail. The woman's dull green eyes sparkled behind her glasses, and her lips curved into a gentle smile. "Hello, how can I help you?" the headmistress asked, her tone warm as she assessed Lyric's sundress. "I'm here to ask if you have any job openings. My brother and I just moved here, and I'd love the chance to work," Lirio replied, clutching the hem of her dress. "Come in and have a seat," the woman said, gesturing to a couch in her office. "I'm Maricel Rents, but everyone calls me Maricel." "Thank you for hearing me out," Lyria said gratefully, sitting down as Maricel settled behind her desk. "It's no trouble. I've been looking for a new teacher to replace someone the students often complain about. I just have a few questions for you," Maricel said, organizing some papers. "Of course," Lyric agreed, feeling more confident in Maricel's kind presence. "First, do you have any teaching experience?" Maricel asked, her tone gentle but professional. "Yes, I taught back home, and the children always seemed to enjoy my lessons," Lyric answered truthfully. Do you have any history of violence? Maricel continued, her voice still kind but firm. No, I had a peaceful childhood, and don't see myself as a violent person, Lyric replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Lastly, why do you want to teach? Maricel asked, her expression turning more serious. I've always enjoyed teaching, and it feels like the right thing for me to do. It would also help with the expenses of our new home, Lyra said confidently. Wonderful. You're hired, Maricel said, standing up. You'll start tomorrow, after I handle the dismissal of the current teacher. Lyric shook Maricel's hand, thanking her repeatedly before leaving the office with a grin. She met up with Kaeren later that evening, and together they made their way to the circus, deciding dinner could wait. Neither of them knew what awaited them there, but Kaelen's instincts demanded they investigate, and Lyric's curiosity made her eager to follow. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 13. As they approached the circus, families with young children moved around them, heading toward the various attractions. The two wolves passed several stalls on their way to the main tent, where they found seats among the growing crowd. More and more people filed in, clearly excited to catch the first performance of the circus. The murmurs and laughter of the audience quieted as the curtains parted, revealing the ringmaster, who was followed by the entire cast of performers. Music began to play, and the performers danced energetically to the rhythm, kicking off the show with an upbeat number. When the opening routine ended, the performers exited the stage, leaving the ringmaster alone in the spotlight. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages. Prepare to be amazed, the ringmaster announced, his voice booming throughout the tent. The crowd erupted into cheers as the first act began. A group of clowns spilled out of a tiny car, performing comedic antics to the delight of the audience. They were followed by the trapeze artists, stunt performers, and other acts, each dazzling the crowd with their talents. For Kaeren and Lyric, however, the applause and cheers were nearly deafening, overwhelming their sensitive hearing. After the final act, a concluding dance number brought the performers back to the stage, and then the lights went out. The air buzzed with anticipation as the audience held their breath. Now, a special treat, the mysterious Wolfman, the ringmaster shouted, as the lights came back on to reveal a cage in the center of the ring. Kaeren and Lyric froze in horror as they realized the cage held one of their own. Inside was a man in human form, but he quickly shifted into a scarred and ragged grey wolf with a white stripe running along his back. The performers returned to the stage, taunting the caged wolf until it snarled and bared its teeth. Kaeren fought to suppress the rage boiling inside him. The sight of the imprisoned werewolf brought back painful memories of his own time in captivity. Lyric was struggling too, her emotions raw and her wolf instincts surging after only a short time of embracing her dual nature. When the show ended and the curtains fell, Kaeren and Lyric slipped out of the tent and headed into the cover of the trees. Kaeren, we have to free him, Lyriel said urgently, her voice trembling with a mix of desperation and compassion. Keeping him like that puts all worlds at risk. I know, Kaeren replied, his tone equally determined. But we have to wait until everyone leaves. We can't risk being seen. The pair watched the circus for hours, waiting for the crowds to thin. When the lights finally went out and the last visitors had departed, Kaeren and Lyric emerged from the tree line, alert to any signs of danger. The overpowering sense of humans and food made tracking difficult, but Kaeren eventually caught the wolf's scent. He led Lyric around the back of the train, where they found the cage holding the grey wolf. Hey, we're going to get you out of here. Stay quiet, Kaeren whispered, crouching near the cage. The wolf stared at him in confusion, so Kaeren let his eyes glow gold to assert his authority. The grey wolf flattened his ears and tucked his tail in submission. We need to hurry, Lyria whispered anxiously. What if someone comes to check on him? Kaeren nodded, snapping the lock on the cage with ease. I'm letting you out, he said to the wolf. Follow us back to our home. The grey wolf nodded, and Kaeren opened the cage. They led him back to the tree line, where both Kaeren and Lyric shifted into their wolf forms. Carrying their clothes in their jaws, they guided the grey wolf through the forest to their cabin. Upon arrival, Lyric shifted back into her human form to unlock the door. She returned with extra clothes, placing them near the grey wolf before retreating inside. Kaeren shifted back next and stretched before addressing the newcomer. Go wash up at the stream, Kaeren said, handing the man the clothes. That'll hold you over until we can set up a proper bath. Thank you, Alpha. Your kindness is more than I deserve. I'll never forget this, the grey wolf said, his voice filled with gratitude. He headed toward the stream, and Kaeren kept watch, giving him as much privacy as possible while listening to the quiet sounds of the forest. When the man returned, freshly cleaned and dressed, he approached Kaeren with a respectful nod. Thank you for waiting, Alpha, he said, his tone humble. No problem, but you don't have to call me Alpha unless it's necessary, Kaeren replied, still uncomfortable with the idea of blind loyalty based solely on his rank. It would feel disrespectful to someone of your status, the grey wolf said, tilting his head in confusion at Kaelen's unusual request. Let's compromise, Kaeren suggested. Call me Alpha only when the situation requires it, otherwise just use my name. What's your name, by the way? Thorn, the man replied, smiling. I owe you my freedom, Alpha Kaeren, and I pledge my loyalty to you and your pack. It's nice to meet you, Thorn, Kaeren said with a nod. I'm Kaeren and this is Lyric. At that moment, Lyric stepped outside, wiping her hands on an apron. Nice to meet you, Thorn, she said warmly. Come inside. I've just plated some food. Is she your mate, Alpha? Thorn asked curiously, noting the casual way they interacted. No, Kaeren replied, slightly amused. She's more like a sister to me. She's my beta, and you're welcome to join us as one too. With introductions complete, the three wolves retreated into the cabin for a late supper. They ate together, unaware of the storm brewing for the next day, as the circus prepared to search for their missing wolfman. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 14. Kaeren woke to the sound of shouting and swearing, the noise faint but steadily approaching the cabin. Grumbling under his breath, he got out of bed and headed to Lyric's room. She was already stepping out, her expression a mix of anger and exhaustion. Without saying a word, Kaeren made his way to Thorn's room and knocked on the door. It opened immediately, revealing Thorn's worried face, his fear and frustration plain to see. It seems the circus has noticed your absence, Kaeren growled, his teeth clenched. His golden eyes flickered with rage as his emotions threatened to take control. I figured as much. What should I do? I can't go back, Thorn said firmly, though his voice carried a hint of vulnerability. They're almost here, Kaeren. What's the plan? Lyric asked, her irritation at being woken evident in her sharp tone. I need you to hide in the basement, Kaeren instructed, his voice steady with authority. We'll handle this. We'll find out what they want and deal with it. Once it's safe, you can come back out. This threat to our pack will be dealt with one way or another. Both Lyric and Thorn nodded in agreement, trusting their Alpha's judgment. They all sat down for a quick breakfast of eggs and ham before the shouting grew louder, signaling the group's arrival. Just as the angry voices reached the cabin, Kaeren and Lyric escorted Thorn to the basement. Stay here until we tell you it's safe, Lyric whispered to Thorn, her tone laced with reassurance as she closed the basement door. Kaeren and Lyric stood by the cabin's entrance waiting for the group to reach the door. Before anyone could knock, Kaeren opened it, stepping out to meet them. The marshal stood at the forefront, a tall, slender man with a neatly twisted moustache under his hat and a gold star pinned to his vest. Beside him was the circus ringmaster, dressed flamboyantly in his circus attire, his piercing green eyes scanning the cabin while his brown hair, tied back in a ponytail, glinted in the sunlight. Behind them were several townsfolk, likely there to assist the circus in recovering what they had lost. "What can we do for you, fine gentlemen?" "My sister and I were just about to head into town," Kaeren said, folding his arms across his chest in a stance of calm authority. "The circus had something stolen last night, and we're here to ask for your assistance in locating it," the marshal explained, his voice steady but his posture faltering slightly under Kaelen's intense gaze. "Oh, that's terrible," Lulith said, her voice light and cheerful, masking her unease. "I'm sure my brother would be happy to help." "Well, thank you, ma'am," the marshal replied politely. "Sir, you can say your goodbyes, and then we'll get moving." The marshal stepped back with the rest of the group, giving Kaeren and Lyric a moment of privacy. Kaeren closed the door gently and turned to Lyric. "Kaeren likely searched the woods. Stay here with Thorn and keep the cabin secure. I'll return once they give up," Kaeren instructed, patting Lyric on the shoulder before heading out to join the group. Kaeren walked with the search party through the woods, his patience wearing thin. He resented having to help, but refusing would raise suspicion, and maintaining a good relationship with the marshal was crucial. He stayed silent, avoiding the conversations about the circus's missing asset, knowing it would only provoke his inner wolf. Thorn was now part of his pack, and Kaeren was determined to protect him. "This is taking forever. Where could that beast have gone?" the ringmaster shouted, his voice grating on Kaelen's sensitive ears. "Maybe it's already dead," one of the townsfolk suggested, earning a swift strike from the ringmaster's cane. Kaeren clenched his fists, his wolf demanding justice for the cruelty, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't risk leaving a trail of violence that might lead back to his pack. The search dragged on until nightfall, at which point the ringmaster finally gave up, much to Kaelen's relief. "Sorry to keep you all day. Thank you for helping us," the marshal said, shaking Kaelen's hand before leading the group back to town. Once they were out of sight, Kaeren shifted into his wolf form. Trotting through the forest, he created multiple trails to confuse anyone who might try to track him. When he finally reached the cabin, he saw Lyric and Thorn waiting by the door. Even in his wolf form, his presence commanded respect, and they both instinctively lowered their gazes in submission. Kaeren shifted back into his human form, unapologetic about his nudity, and quickly dressed in the clothes he had carried in his jaws. "How did it go?" Lyric asked as soon as he was clothed. "They gave up at nightfall. The circus is packing up and the train will leave soon," Kaeren replied, stepping inside and spotting a meal prepared on the table. He smiled gratefully at Lyric. "I'm free," Thorn said, collapsing into a chair as the realization sank in. "Yes, you're free. What you do as part of this pack is your choice," Kaeren assured him before digging into the food. "You're building quite the pack of misfits, eh, Alpha?" Lyric teased, grinning as she sat down to finish her meal. Kaeren couldn't help but agree. Despite their individual differences, they were forming a strong and united pack, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 15. The three werewolves woke up to a peaceful morning, with the circus having finally left the small town. Lyric was the first to stir, preparing herself for her first day as a teacher at the local school. She cooked breakfast for herself, Kaeren, and Thorn, and also packed lunch for each of them. After eating, she stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the forest around her quiet and serene. Walking down the dirt path toward the village, Lyric felt her wolf content with the natural surroundings. But as she neared the town, The various smells and sounds started to unsettle her inner wolf, making it restless. Lyric pushed down the unease, steadying her resolve as she made her way to the schoolhouse. When she entered the building, a mix of scents hit her sensitive nose all at once. The aroma of stew simmering, the distinct smells of over 30 children, and the presence of 2 other women. She sneezed lightly to clear her nose and straightened her posture, walking purposefully toward the classroom. Opening the door, she stepped inside, drawing the children's attention immediately. The room fell silent as Leary closed the door and smiled warmly at the students. "Hello, everyone. You may call me Miss Lyric. I'll be your new teacher," she said, writing her name on the chalkboard with careful strokes. "Hello, Miss Lyric," the 10 children replied in unison, their voices small but enthusiastic. "Today, we'll start with some basic maths," Lyri announced, writing simple money calculations on the board. The class consisted of children aged 8 to 10, with 6 boys and 4 girls. Lyric scanned the room, her wolf sensing the eagerness and nervousness in the young minds before her. "Who'd like to come up and solve these problems?" she asked, turning to face the class. "Me, Miss Lyric. Pick me," a little girl called out, waving her hand excitedly. "Come on up. What's your name, sweetheart?" Lyric asked, smiling as she motioned for the girl to approach. "My name is Isolde, Miss Lyric," the 9-year-old replied, picking up the chalk and confidently solving all 10 problems, including the more challenging one Lyric had added as a test. Lyric watched with admiration as the girl completed the equations. Isolde's sharp mind impressed her, making her wonder if the child might be gifted. "Well done, Isolde. You got every single one correct," Lyri praised, beaming at the girl's delighted grin. The rest of the day was filled with lessons in writing, reading, and basic science. Though the boys occasionally teased Isolde for being smarter than them, Lyric ensured the environment remained encouraging. After school, Lyric stopped by the town store to purchase eggs, bread, and potatoes before heading back through the woods toward the cabin. As she neared the cabin, Lyric caught an unusual scent. Setting the groceries down, she followed the trail, her wolf sniffing out the source. The smell grew sickly sweet, making her sneeze. At the end of the trail, she found a man lying on the ground, his throat ripped open yet still breathing faintly. Approaching cautiously, her wolf growled in recognition of another predator. "Are you all right?" Lirio asked, kneeling beside him and observing his shallow breaths. "Oh, that's your sweet one, sugar," the man rasped, his grey eyes twinkling with mischief despite his condition. He flashed a smile, revealing elongated fangs. "You look like you're dying," Lyric said, her voice rising in concern as her wolf whined in distress. "It'll take more than this to kill me, darling. I just need blood and some rest," the stranger replied, his fangs extending further at the mention of blood. "What are you?" Lyra whispered, her instincts conflicting as she finally paid attention to her wolf's reaction. "A vampire, Miss Werewolf. So, what's it going to be? Will you kill me or will you help me?" he asked with a dry chuckle before wincing in pain. "I'll help you," Lyrit sighed, unsure why her wolf pushed her to aid him. "Much obliged, Lyric," the vampire grinned, his blonde hair falling into his grey eyes. "How do you know my name?" Lyria demanded, startled. "You said it while thinking, didn't you? Mine's Darien. See you when you get back," he said, his voice teasing as Lyric turned and sprinted back to the cabin. Picking up the groceries she had dropped, Lyric burst into the clearing, spotting Thorn chopping wood and Kaeren dragging a deer toward the cooking pot. "Kaeren! Thorn! I need your help," she panted, her chest rising and falling from the run. "What happened, Lyric?" Kaeren asked, his eyes narrowing at her evident distress. "I found a vampire in the woods. He's injured and I promised to help him," Lyric admitted, a low whine escaping her as she dropped the groceries. "Where is he?" Kaeren demanded, his protective instincts kicking in as he realized the potential threat. "He's about half a mile from town. I can lead you there, Lyric replied, her anxiety growing the longer she stayed away from the vampire. All right, Thorn, stay here and pour some blood from the deer into a glass for our guest, Kaelen ordered, before nodding for Lyric to lead the way. Lyric smiled gratefully at her alpha, guiding him back to where she had left Darien. When they reached him, Kaelen lifted the injured vampire into his arms and carried him to the cabin. Here, drink this, Lyria said, holding the glass of deer blood to Darien's lips. Thank you, sugar, Darien murmured, drinking greedily. Why had she helped him, Lyrith wondered. Her wolf's instincts still didn't entirely make sense, but for now, she would trust them. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 16. Kaelen observed from a distance as Lyric cradled the vampire's head, whispering softly to him. The sight made the wolf within Kaelen growl with understanding, what Kaelen himself wasn't quite ready to admit. The vampire wasn't just a passing guest. He was going to stay, whether Kaelen liked it or not. Sighing deeply, Kaelen turned away and shifted into his wolf form, the transformation smooth and natural. He trotted into the forest, his senses tuned to the borders of their territory, scanning for any signs that danger might have followed the injured vampire. Being away from Lyric and Thorn gave him much-needed space to reflect. The connection between the vampire and Lyric was evident, filling Kaelen with conflicting emotions. Relief washed over him knowing Lyric might find happiness again, but it was tinged with concern about how the vampire would react when he learned of her past struggles. Looks like we've got another pack member, Kaelen thought, his wolf huffing in agreement. I'll need to set some ground rules if he's staying. As he circled back toward the cabin, the scent of food wafted through the trees, making his stomach growl. Breaking through the tree line, his wolf let out a pleased rumble as he caught sight of the vampire standing over the cooking pot, stirring its contents. Nearby, Lyric and Thorn were deep in conversation with him. "Does your alpha treat you well, darling?" the vampire asked Lyric. His tone light, though his gaze flicked toward Kaelen Wolf as it emerged from the trees. "Yes, he's like a brother to me," Lyric answered honestly, her words swelling Kaelen with quiet pride. Kaelen shifted back into his human form, quickly dressing before approaching the group. He took a seat next to Thorn, addressing the vampire directly.
"I see you're feeling better, vampire," Kaelen said evenly. "I am Alpha. The name's Darien," the vampire replied, finally introducing himself. "Well, Darien, what brought you onto my land?" Kaelen asked, his tone firm but calm. His wolf was on alert, ensuring no threat lingered that could harm the pack. "I lost my territory in a dispute. The victor tossed me onto your land, assuming you'd finish me off," Darien explained as he began portioning out the soup he'd prepared. "Will this victor be a threat to my pack?" Kaelen pressed, his golden eyes briefly flashing, a warning that he would defend his pack to the death. "I doubt it. Once a vampire claims prime territory, they're too busy defending it from other vampires to worry about much else," Darien said, handing Kaelen a bowl of food. Kaelen nodded in thanks, taking a bite of the meal. The rich flavors of the meat and vegetables surprised him. It was one of the best meals he'd had in years. His wolf rumbled approvingly, and Kaelen couldn't help but grin at Darien. "It's incredible. Where'd you learn to cook like this?" Thorn asked between mouthfuls, still not fully accustomed to regular meals after his time with the circus a few decades ago. "I thought it might impress my future mate," Darien admitted, with a sly wink at Lyric, who immediately blushed a deep shade of red. "Can he stay, Kaelen?" Lyric asked suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. Her eyes flickered between human and wolf as she wrestled with her emotions. Her wolf recognized Darien as her mate, but the human part of her struggled with memories of her painful past. "Do you want to stay, Darien?" Kaelen asked, rising to his feet and meeting the vampire's gaze. Yes, Alpha, I want to stay, Darian replied, his eyes dropping in submission, acknowledging Kaelin's dominance. There are conditions, Kaelin said firmly. What conditions? Darian asked, his eyes briefly darting to Lyric, as though her presence gave him strength. First, you're not to harm or hunt the townsfolk. It would raise suspicion, and we can't afford that. Second, no reading our minds, unless you're given explicit permission. Third, Lyric has been through enough. Be gentle in how you approach her, Kaelin added, the last part spoken in a low tone meant only for Darian to hear. I accept your terms, Darian said quickly, as if afraid Kaelin might change his mind. Welcome to the pack, Darian. Let's hope this was the right decision, Kaelin said, extending his hand. You won't regret it, Alpha, Darian promised, shaking Kaelin's hand firmly. Kaelin stepped back as Thorn and Lyric formally welcomed the vampire to the pack. Adding a vampire to a wolf pack, definitely unconventional, Thorn remarked quietly as he stood beside Kaelin, watching Lyric and Darian interact. You see it too, don't you? Kaelin asked, nodding toward Lyric and Darian. Their connection was undeniable, even though neither had openly acknowledged it yet. I do. I just hope he treats her with the respect she deserves. Thorn replied, a faint smile crossing his face. Well, and if he doesn't, he'll answer to me, Kaelin growled softly, his wolf fully in agreement. Back inside the cabin, Kaelin rubbed his face, exhaustion setting in. He'd spent the day hunting for the Hunters Guild, only for the unexpected arrival of Darian to consume the rest of his energy. Still, he hadn't had a chance to ask Lyric about her first day teaching. As he retreated to his room, Kaelin let out a heavy sigh, his thoughts drifting to the concept of mates. While he was genuinely happy for Lyric, a pang of jealousy tugged at his heart. He shook the feeling off, reminding himself that his time would come. For now, his focus was on protecting and cherishing the pack he had. A family he would defend with everything he had. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you.
Chapter 17. Thorn woke to the soft hum of a tune drifting through the air. The sound instantly dragged him back to his darkest memories, the ringmaster humming as the whip cracked against his skin. A whimper escaped his lips as the weight of his past pulled him into the familiar abyss of despair. Instinctively, Thorn's body shifted into his wolf form, the fur providing a sense of security his human skin could not. Curling up tightly, he buried his muzzle under the pillow, muffling his fearful whines. He hadn't always been like this, so broken. Once he had been a proud warrior in a pack he trusted, a fighter who had earned his place. But betrayal had come from within. His fellow warriors, consumed by envy, had turned on him, destroying the life he had built. A knock at the door didn't pull Thorn from his thoughts. It wasn't until a hand gently rested between his ears that he realized Kaelin had entered the room. You don't have to say anything now, but I'm here if you need me, Kaelin said softly, his hand moving through the grey fur on Thorn's head, the soothing touch grounding him. Thorn let out a low whine, leaning into his alpha's presence. They sat in silence, Kaelin offering comfort without words, his steady demeanor anchoring Thorn to reality. It took 10 long minutes before Thorn finally found the strength to shift back into his human form. Thank you, Kaelin, Thorn said, sitting up and offering a grateful look. There's no need to thank me, we all have our demons, Kaelin replied, a haunted shadow flickering across his features before he masked it. Well, I appreciate you helping me find my footing again, Thorn said, with a small tentative smile. I'm here for my pack. We're brothers now, Kaelin replied with a grin, rising from the bed. Can you take me into town today? Thorn asked as Kaelin moved toward the door. Of course. Anywhere specific you have in mind? Kaelin asked, his expression softening. I'll know it when I see it, Thorn said, determined to find a purpose now that he was free. All right, we'll head out after breakfast, Kaeren said, leaving the room. With a sigh, Thorn pulled himself out of bed. His eyes caught the web of scars crisscrossing his torso, reminders of his past. Shaking off the thoughts, he dressed quickly and made his way to the kitchen. Stopping in the doorway, Thorn smiled at the scene before him. Darian and Lyric moved around the kitchen together, cooking breakfast with an ease and joy that spoke of their growing bond. Plates of eggs, ham and bread were already on the table, and Kaeren sat grinning at the cheerful display. Thorn took a seat at the table as Lyric and Darian joined them, their small affectionate gestures not going unnoticed. As he ate his breakfast, Thorn's wolf felt a sense of peace being surrounded by a pack again. He hoped, cautiously, that this family would not betray him like the last. Looking around, he saw a group of individuals who had suffered deeply, their shared pain forging a strong bond between them. "You ready to head out?" Kaeren asked, finding Thorn waiting outside. "As ready as I'll ever be," Thorn replied, though tension rippled through his posture. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. I'm here if you need me," Kaeren reassured him, giving Thorn a supportive pat on the back. With a deep breath, Thorn let go of his nerves, nodding. Together, they set off through the forest toward the town. Thorn couldn't help but admire Kaeren. He was patient, understanding, and a leader who would grow even greater as their pack expanded. Allowing a vampire into their fold just to make Lyric happy showed the depth of his commitment to his packmates. "We're here," Kaeren announced, as they emerged from the tree line into the bustling town. The sights, sounds, and smells overwhelmed Thorn at first, his nose wrinkling at the mix of scents. Still, it was infinitely better than the stench of the circus. Walking through the streets, he felt the weight of curious stares, his fists clenching at the unwanted attention. "You're doing great. Are we close to where you want to go?" Kaeren asked, shooting a sharp glare at a group of women whispering nearby. "Yes, it's just up ahead," Thorn said, pointing toward a building with a hammer on the sign and the word blacksmith. "You're a blacksmith?" Kaeren asked, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "Yes, though I fear it's a dying trade," Thorn admitted as he pushed open the door. A wave of hot air hit him, accompanied by the scent of smoke and metal. The cacophony of hammering filled the space, but instead of being overwhelmed, Thorn felt a deep sense of home. "You can head to your job now, Kaeren. I'm going to ask to apprentice here. I'll see you back at the cabin," Thorn said quietly, his voice tinged with determination. "All right," Kaeren said, giving Thorn a nod before leaving. Following the rhythmic clang of metal, Thorn rounded a corner to find the blacksmith hard at work, a welding mask obscuring his face as he shaped a rod of steel into a sword. "Hello," Thorn called, his voice loud enough to carry over the hammering. "And you are?" the blacksmith asked, barely sparing him a glance. "I'd like to apprentice under you," Thorn said, his tone steady. "Fine, but I'm not responsible for any injuries," the man grumbled. "Name's Thorn," he introduced himself. "Bodge, bring me a bucket of water," the blacksmith replied, returning to his work. Thorn smiled as he moved to fetch the water, a sense of purpose lighting within him. Finally, he was doing something meaningful, something that would keep his hands and mind busy. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 18. Darian couldn't help but smile as he held Lyric close, her warmth against him grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. They had mated 3 months after meeting, and those months had been filled with learning about one another. His rage had been uncontrollable when Lyric had confided how she became a werewolf, revealing the horrors inflicted on her. How dare anyone harm what was his? It was then he understood the depth of his respect for Kaeren, the alpha who had saved her. Now another 3 months had passed, and Darien couldn't imagine a better life. Being part of the pack had given him stability, camaraderie, and purpose. He no longer had to defend territory alone, and the sense of belonging filled the void he hadn't realized was so vast. He had also started working at the town's small clinic, where his medical knowledge far exceeded that of the human doctors. Kaeren, meanwhile, had moved on from the Hunters Guild to help the villagers with their crops. Thorn had found his place as an apprentice blacksmith under Forge, and though he still struggled with occasional triggers from his traumatic past, he was making progress. Darien admired the gentle but strong spirit of the wolf, who only fought when absolutely necessary. Lyric seemed truly content. Marizelle, flourishing as a teacher in the local school, her students adored her, and she was quickly becoming one of the most praised educators in the area. Darien's thoughts were interrupted when Lyric began to stir beside him. She had drifted off after they made love, and was now waking just as the full moon climbed to its highest point. "Hi," Lyric murmured, blinking up at him, her eyes flickering between her human shade and the glowing gold of her wolf as the moon's pull grew stronger. "Hey," Darien replied softly, placing a tender kiss on her forehead. "The moon is almost full. I can feel the wolf rising. My body's burning up," Lyric said, throwing the covers off as her skin flushed with heat in anticipation of the shift. "Kaeren and Thorn are probably already shifted, waiting for us to join them," Darien said as he tugged on his shirt, pants, and shoes. "Is it fun for you to run with us when we're in wolf form?" Lyric asked, stretching as she prepared for the shift. "Of course. It's bonding for the pack, and hunting together is exhilarating. Plus, I get to connect our minds, so we know each other's thoughts." "I love every side of you, sweetheart," Darien replied, walking over to her and pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. "I love you too," Lyric whispered, her words turning into a soft growl as she deepened the kiss, moaning when Diana's fangs grazed her lips. "We'd better get going. Kaeren and Thorn are waiting," Darien chuckled, hearing impatient growls outside. Lyrith laughed, opening the bedroom door before shifting into her sandy wolf form. Darien immediately linked their minds, connecting her thoughts with the rest of the pack. "Get out here, slowpokes, we're ready to hunt," Kaeren teased through the link, his tone light but commanding. "Yes, Alpha," Lyric replied playfully, bounding out of the cabin to greet the others. Darien followed, grinning as he watched the wolves rub against one another, reaffirming their bonds. Reaching out, he scratched behind Lyric's ears, earning approving growls. Not wanting to leave anyone out, he scratched Kaeren and Thorn too, amused by how even these massive wolves melted under his touch. Kaeren let out a howl, a signal to the forest that this was their land. Thorn and Lyric joined in, and Darien tilted his head back, adding his own voice to the chorus. Their combined howls echoed through the trees, a powerful declaration of unity. As the pack began their run, Darien leapt from tree to tree, keeping pace. He'd grown to love these hunts, the thrill of the chase, the unity of the pack, and the raw, untamed instincts made these nights unforgettable. The pack slowed as they neared a herd of deer. Darien, perched above them, noticed Kaeren, Thorn, and Lyric honing in on a limping buck. "Go," Kaeren commanded through the link, charging forward to scatter the herd. "On the left, an old buck," Thorn directed, his focus locked on the target. "I've got it," Lyric responded, darting toward the injured animal. Darien leapt from his perch, landing on the buck's back to steady its antlers. "Let's finish this," he growled as Kaelen's jaws clamped around the buck's throat. The buck thrashed violently, but together the pack brought it down. Darien, satisfied with his contribution, stepped back as the wolves tore into their meal. Climbing back into a tree, he fed on the buck's blood, the warm liquid energizing him. His glowing red eyes watched as Lyric snapped at Thorn when he tried to steal her share, and pride swelled in his chest. A low growl from Kaelen snapped Darian's attention to the tree line. Leaping down, he stood beside his alpha, watching as a rogue wolf emerged. Its pitch-black eyes, dripping saliva, and snarling face told them all they needed to know. The rogue had come for their kill, and he wasn't leaving without a fight. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent, interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 19. Kaelen collided with the rogue in a violent clash of snarls and fur. As the alpha, it was his duty to defend his pack and their kill. They tumbled across the clearing, each fighting for dominance. Kaelen was the first to rise, growling deeply as he snapped his jaws at the rogue, whose attention had shifted to Lyric. The rogue's smirk was twisted, his predatory gaze locked onto Lyric, and he licked his lips hungrily. Rage consumed Kaelen as he realized the rogue's intentions toward his beta and pack sister. With a snarl, he launched himself at the rogue, pinning him to the ground and aiming for his throat. But the rogue was quick, kicking Kaelen off and scrambling to his feet. Kaelen shook his head, his snarl growing louder as the rogue barreled into him again. Before Kaelen could regain control, Darian intervened, his fist connecting with the rogue's side, sending him flying into a tree. The rogue let out a pitiful whine as he hit the trunk, but Darian didn't falter. The vampire's face twisted in fury, and his entire body seemed to vibrate with anger. "His mind is diseased," Darian growled, his voice laced with disgust. He grabbed the rogue by the neck and hurled him toward Kaelen. Trusting Darian's assessment, Kaelen acted without hesitation. He leapt onto the rogue, sinking his teeth into the wolf's throat and ripping it out in one swift motion. Blood sprayed across Kaelen's dark fur as the rogue let out a final, gurgling breath. Stepping over the lifeless body, Kaelen turned to Lyric and Thorn. Both had their hackles raised and teeth bared, ready to jump in if needed. They had held back only because Darian had intervened first. "Thank you, Darian," Kaelen said, his voice heavy with gratitude as he padded back to the kill. "No one gets to think about my mate like that," Darian hissed, his gaze lingering on the rogue's now human, lifeless form. With the threat eliminated, the pack finished their meal before heading back to the cabin. Darian used his powers to conjure a gust of wind, erasing their tracks leading to the cabin. However, they knew they would need to deal with the rogue's body the next day to ensure no one discovered it. "Darian, could you open the door?" Thorn asked as they approached the cabin. "Of course," Darian replied with a smile, holding the door open as the others trotted inside. Kaelen couldn't deny how well Darian had adapted to pack life. The wolf within him agreed that allowing the vampire to join had been the right choice. Not only because Darian was Lyric's mate, but also because he had proven himself a loyal and valuable ally. Shaking off his thoughts, Kaelen headed to his room. Curling up on his bed, he hoped for a peaceful night free of the nightmares that sometimes haunted him. The soft snores of Thorn from the adjacent room, paired with the gentle rustling of the wind outside, soon lulled him to sleep. Kaelen awoke the next morning to the scent of sizzling eggs, ham, and freshly toasted bread. The sound of birds chirping outside blended with the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Realizing he had shifted back into human form after the full moon, Kaelen stretched and was about to rise when he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats growing louder as they neared the cabin. Tensing, Kaelen remembered the story they had told the townsfolk. He and Thorn were Lyric's brothers, and Darian was her husband. It was a lie designed to avoid suspicion, but he worried it might not hold up if questions were asked. Hearing the marshal's familiar voice, Kaeren jumped out of bed, pulling on a shirt and pants before heading to the kitchen. Lyra handed him a plate of breakfast, her gaze fixed on the window as the hoofbeats grew closer. "They wouldn't have had time to find that body, right?" Kaeren asked, breaking the tense silence. "Unlikely. I erased our tracks as we headed back. They shouldn't suspect us," Darian reassured him, though his tone was cautious. Their conversation was cut short by a knock at the door. Kaeren set his plate down and strode to the door, opening it to find the Marshal Darrow standing there. The man's face bore a mix of seriousness and curiosity, and Kaeren knew what was coming before the Marshal even spoke. "Hunter found a body in the woods near a deer carcass," the Marshal explained. "Looks like there's a pack of wolves in the area. Just thought you'd want to be aware." Kaeren nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Thanks for letting me know, Marshal. We'll be sure to stay cautious." "That's all. I'll head back to town now," the Marshal said, tipping his hat before walking back to his horse. Kaeren watched as the Marshal mounted and rode off before closing the door and returning to the kitchen. Relief washed over the pack. For now, their secret was safe. "I'm heading to town. School starts soon," Deirdre announced, hanging her apron on a peg by the door. "I'll go with you. The clinic needs me today," Darian added, pulling Lyric into a side hug. "Kale doesn't expect me until later, so I'll join Kaelen in the fields," Thorn said, finishing his glass of water. "It sounds good," Kaelen agreed, settling back at the table as Darian and Lyric left, hand in hand. As the room fell into a comfortable silence, Kaelen's thoughts drifted to the warning Raziel, the werelion, had given him months ago. He hoped the rogue's death wouldn't attract the attention of slayers, but the uneasy feeling in his gut told him it might. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 20. Surveying the scene before her, the slayer exhaled heavily. From the evidence, it was clear the local pack had made a kill and fed on it before being confronted by a hostile rogue. The pack had eliminated the threat and continued their activities. There didn't appear to be any imminent danger to the humans in the area, but protocol required her to investigate further. She needed to assess the pack thoroughly, to ensure they posed no threat. Covering her tracks carefully, the slayer headed straight through the forest, making her way into the town. Upon entering, she inhaled deeply, sorting through the myriad of scents that filled the air. The familiar smells of humans, livestock, and food were intermingled with 4 distinct supernatural signatures: 3 werewolves and a vampire. Deciding to start with the vampire, she adjusted her hat over her short, fiery red hair and began walking down the bustling street. As she navigated the town, passing villagers going about their day, she found herself standing in front of the local clinic. She stepped aside to let a woman exit, offering a polite smile before entering. Inside, the waiting area was sparsely populated, with a few elderly individuals occupying the seats. The slayer followed the vampire's scent trail, which led her to one of the consultation rooms. Opening the door, she stepped inside. The vampire looked up at her, curiosity and wariness flickering in his eyes. "Hello, vampire," she greeted, closing the door behind her. "You're a slayer. What do you want?" the vampire hissed, baring his fangs in warning. "Relax. I'm not here to harm you. My mission is purely reconnaissance," she reassured him, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. The vampire studied her for a moment before retracting his fangs. "Fine. I'll answer your questions, but you have to promise not to harm my mate." "You have my word," she agreed, noting the pale mating scar just visible above the vampire's shirt collar as she sat down. My name is Darien. What do you need to know? The vampire asked, pacing the room. I'm Soraya, the Slayer introduced herself. I'm here on behalf of the Slayer Council. 2 weeks ago, a hunter found a dead rogue near a deer carcass. My job is to ensure the humans here aren't at risk because of your pact. Darian's glare intensified. The rogue was a threat. He had to be dealt with. You should speak to my alpha if you want the full story. Soraya found it unusual for a vampire to recognize a werewolf as his alpha. Still, if his mate was a wolf, it made a degree of sense. All right, I'll meet your alpha. Have a good day, Darien. As she stood to leave, Darien let out a sigh of relief. Soraya waved before exiting the clinic, her mind already on her next target. She followed one of the male werewolf scents through the town, passing villagers along the way. A fleeting thought crossed her mind. What would it be like to live a normal life, free from the council's demands? The weight of her service to the Slayer Council bore down on her as she walked. For 150 years she had killed and captured for mortal masters who changed with time, while she remained bound by immortality after consuming the final elixir. The thought of breaking free from their control was as tempting as it was daunting. Her musings were interrupted when a small child collided with her. I'm so sorry, sir, the boy's mother apologized, holding her son's hand. Humans often mistook her for a man due to her attire. She even used the alias Elliot when necessary. It's all right, ma'am, Soraya replied, lowering her voice to its practiced masculine tone as she stepped around them. She spotted a male werewolf exiting the blacksmith's shop and stopped to observe. The werewolf's behavior intrigued her. He seemed skittish, as if afraid of his own shadow, which told her he wasn't the alpha. Deciding to move on, Soraya followed the second male scent, which led her toward the fields. On her way, she passed a schoolyard where the female werewolf was supervising children at play. Soraya smiled faintly as the beta helped a little girl who had been pushed over. She filed the she-wolf's demeanor away in her mind, caring, attentive, and non-threatening. Continuing into the fields, Soraya spotted the alpha at work, lifting heavy bundles of crops onto a wagon. As she approached, her heartbeat quickened unexpectedly. The closer she got, the more intoxicating his scent became. When he noticed her, his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, sending a shiver down her spine. Her legs felt weak under his steady gaze. His nostrils flared as he analyzed her scent, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The sight of him raking a hand through his black hair, muscles rippling with the motion, momentarily stole her thoughts. Steeling herself, Soraya took a deep breath and extended her hand. Hello, I'm Soraya, she introduced, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 21. Hey, Soraya, I'm Kaeren. What brings you out to the fields? Kaeren asked, his wolf stirring restlessly in his mind, drawn to the woman before him. The animal within him found her intriguing, just as the man did. Kaeren flared his nostrils, catching a trace of arousal mixed in with her scent. A low groan escaped him as his wolf pushed against his control, eager to comfort and protect this woman. Wait, mate. Kaeren hesitated, recalling when Raziel had spoken of mates. He hadn't been sure if he believed in it then. Studying her from head to toe, Kaeren felt puzzled. Her scent revealed she was female, but her appearance might have fooled a human. She wore a long duster coat with numerous pockets, faint traces of weapons hidden within. A wide-brimmed hat shaded her face, though red strands of hair peeked out. She stood tall, just slightly shorter than him. Kaelen, right? You're the Alpha I've been looking for, Soraya said, her voice steady, though it wavered slightly under Kaelen's intense stare. So, you know what I am? Kaelen asked, his golden eyes flashing briefly as his wolf stirred at her acknowledgement. Of course. I'm a slayer, after all, Soraya replied, swallowing hard as his glowing eyes sparked something deep within her. And what exactly do you need from me? Kaelen questioned, raking a hand through his sweat-dampened hair while keeping his gaze locked on her. If what Raziel had warned was true, this woman could take him down before he had a chance to react. Still, his wolf bristled at the idea of harm coming to her. I'm here to investigate the death of the rogue found in your territory, Soraya explained, shaking her head as though to clear her thoughts. I killed him, Kaelen growled. He posed a danger to my pack, so I took care of it. Soraya nodded, noticing the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw tightened. I see. I can't fault you for protecting your own. I'll report back to the Slayer Council and let them know there's no threat here. She turned on her heel, preparing to leave. A wave of panic surged through Kaelen as she began to walk away. Without thinking, he reached out and grabbed her hand. Wait. Why don't you stay a while? He asked, quickly releasing her as she glanced down at their joined hands. And why should I do that? Soraya asked, though her voice softened. The warmth of his touch had left her feeling whole in a way she couldn't explain. I've never met a slayer before, Kaelen replied. Maybe you could teach me what draws your order's attention so I can better protect my pack. Soraya hesitated, her lips parting slightly as she considered his request. Before she could stop herself, she agreed. All right. I'll show you what you need to know to keep the slayers off your trail. Kaelen felt his wolf howl with excitement in his mind. He kept his face calm, not wanting to reveal too much. He didn't want to scare her off by mentioning she was his mate. For now, he would let her adjust to him, hoping she'd come to him on her own terms. Thank you, Kaelen said, his smile wide and genuine. You won't regret this. We can talk when you're done here. Some of the workers are calling for you, Soraya pointed out, nodding toward a group of men waving in his direction. Kaelen nodded, watching as she walked away. It took everything in him not to follow her, his wolf practically begging him to go after her. But he remained rooted in place as Gadik, the farm owner, approached him with a few other workers. Hey, Kaelen, what did that man want? Garrick asked, assuming Soraya was male. Was asking about the body found a while back, Kaelen replied, keeping his tone neutral. Did he mention anything about those giant tracks near the scene? Malric, another worker, chimed in as he joined the group. He did, but it seems like he couldn't make sense of them, Kaelen answered smoothly, masking any concern. Last thing we need is some monster prowling around at night, Garrick grumbled, his booming voice carrying across the field. My wife's been worried sick about our son, Malric added, his hand resting on the pistol strapped to his hip. Kaelen bit back a scoff. He'd killed the rogue, but he'd never harm an innocent. His wolf shared the sentiment. Protecting the weak was ingrained in their nature. The beast is long gone, Kaelen assured them, trying to ease their fears. Maybe so, but I'm not taking chances, Malric declared. I'll talk to the marshal about enforcing a curfew and making sure everyone carries a weapon. Calm down, Malric. Oh, by the way, Kaelen, you're done for the day. You've done more than your share of heavy lifting, Garrick said, clapping a hand on Malric's shoulder before leading him away. Kaelen wiped his hands on his trousers and headed toward the town. As he walked, he caught the familiar sense of his packmates. Lyric was still at the school, and Darian was busy at the clinic. But Thorn's scent wasn't at the blacksmith's. It was in the woods, mingled with another wolf's. A frown crossed Kaelen's face. Who was this other wolf? Were they a threat? He quickened his pace, hoping Thorn could handle the situation until he arrived. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 22. Thorn caught the faint scent of another wolf after wrapping up his work at the blacksmith shop. He immediately recognized it as female. A lone wolf. Not a rogue. Something about her scent stirred curiosity within him and awakened his wolf. Without hesitation, he shifted into his wolf form and bolted through the forest, following the trail. He started a tent, slowing his pace. Through the woodland, the sound of her paws on the forest maracel all quickened his pace, his wolf howling with excitement at the chase. He pushed himself faster until he was right behind her, nipping at the heels of the snowy white she-wolf. Her coat shimmered like freshly fallen snow. With a powerful leap, Thor tackled her, and they tumbled together on the forest maricel, or, rolling into a clearing, Thorn pinned her down, his gaze locking with hers. Golden eyes met his, and in that instant he felt the missing piece of his soul snap into place. His wolf howled triumphantly. This was his mate. Stunned, Thorn leapt back and shifted into his human form, gesturing for her to do the same. When she shifted, Thorn's breath hitched. In her human form, she stood petite at just 5 feet tall. Her blonde hair cascaded in soft waves down her back, framing her curvaceous figure. Her green eyes glimmered like sunlight filtering through leaves. He couldn't tear his gaze away. Hello, Thorn managed, his fingers twitching as his wolf urged him to reach out to her. What brings you here? I don't know, she admitted, her voice soft yet steady. I followed my wolf's instinct. Her appreciative gaze lingered on him, and Thorn's wolf preened under her attention. I see. What's your name? I'm Thorn, he said, forcing himself to focus on her face instead of her form. My name is Isolde, she replied, her hair catching the light as a gentle breeze swept through the clearing. The sight made her seem almost otherworldly. I'd like to welcome you to my pack's territory, Isolde, Thorn said warmly. But first, you should meet my alpha. He caught the scent of Kaeren nearby, likely waiting at the cabin. Thorn could sense his alpha's cautious tension. It was understandable, after dealing with a rogue so recently. Okay, let's go, Isolde agreed, shifting back into her wolf form without hesitation. Thorn followed her lead, shaking out his grey coat before yipping to ensure she stayed close. As they trotted side by side, Thorn felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his time in captivity. He had once thought he would die in the circus, never imagining he'd find freedom, let alone a mate. When they emerged into the clearing near the cabin, Thorn spotted Kaeren in his large black wolf form, standing alert. His alpha's golden eyes glinted with suspicion as Thorn approached with Isolde. Letting out a nervous whine, Thorn shifted first, followed by Kaeren and Isolde. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. Hello, Alpha. I'm a lone wolf seeking to join your pack, Isolde said respectfully, bowing her head in submission to the powerful Alpha before her. Kaeren visibly relaxed, the tension easing from his shoulders. Thank goodness you're not a rogue, he said. You're welcome to join our pack, but you need to understand 2 things. We don't harm humans. And one of our pack members is a vampire. Isolde tilted her head curiously. A vampire? Why is there a vampire in your pack? Kaeren nodded. His mate is my other beta, Lyric. His name is Darien, and I see you've already met Thorn. With that, Kaeren sighed and turned away, his thoughts occupied with the slayer he had to deal with. Thank you, Alpha, Isolde said gratefully, watching as Kaeren retreated toward the cabin. Oh, and there's a slayer in town, Kaeren called over his shoulder. She approached me already and said we had nothing to worry about. Thanks for the heads up, Kaeren, Thorn replied, turning his attention back to his mate. So, What now? Isolde asked, her green eyes fixed on Thorn. We'll get you some clothes first. Then we need to talk, Thorn said, motioning toward the cabin. Okay, mate, Isolde said, her smile widening as Thorn shivered at the word. Inside the cabin, Thorn retrieved some clothes from Lyric's room before leading Isolde to his own space. It was time to start planning a future together, a life he hadn't thought possible until now. Kaeren rubbed his face as he stood in the kitchen, his thoughts churning. Hearing Thorn and Isolde head to his room, he decided to step out. Shifting into his wolf form, Kaeren lifted his nose to the breeze, searching for her scent. His mate's scent. If she didn't want to be found, she could hide her trail, but tonight she hadn't. An excited bark escaped him as he caught her scent, following the trail she had left for him. His wolf urged him onward, and soon he heard the soft trickle of a stream and the faint sound of humming. Emerging into a clearing, Kaeren found her. Soraya sat on a rock by the stream, her boots off and her feet submerged in the cool water. Her long duster coat and hat rested beside her, revealing her lean, strong frame. He spotted her weapons, a crossbow, pistols, and a knife, close at hand. I know you're there, Kaeren, Soraya called without turning, her voice calm and steady. Snorting softly, Kaeren stepped into the clearing and crossed the stream to sit across from her. His wolf growled with anticipation. He was ready to tell her what she meant to him. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that, to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Epilogue. Kaeren's tail wagged as he admired Soraya's beauty. The sunlight glistened on her hair, giving it an almost otherworldly glow. His wolf stirred within, urging him to claim her as his mate. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of curiosity and joy, were fixed on him. Kaeren shook his head to clear his thoughts, then nodded to himself before shifting into his human form. Kaeren, Soraya squealed, quickly covering her eyes with her hands. Oh, Kaeren mumbled awkwardly, glancing down at his unclothed body. He had completely forgotten that most people weren't accustomed to such casual nudity. Here, use this, Soraya said, tossing her duster coat toward him. Thank you, Kaeren replied, draping the heavy coat over his lap. Are you decent now? Soraya asked, peeking at him through her fingers. As you can see, I am, Kaeren teased, unable to hide his amusement at how comfortable the Slayer seemed around him despite the situation. So, what brings you out here, Alpha? Soraya asked, brushing off his playful tone and focusing on the moment. I was hoping we could talk before you leave, Kaeren admitted, knowing her return to the Slayer Council was imminent. All right, what's on your mind? Soraya asked, her legs swinging idly against the rock she was perched on. I'm not sure how to say this, Kaeren began, his confidence faltering as doubt crept in. You say it, Soraya encouraged, her tone gentle and patient. Kaeren tilted his head, momentarily taken aback. Raziel had always warned him that slayers were cold and merciless, but Soraya's warmth and openness shattered those preconceptions. You're my mate, Kaeren confessed, his voice low but steady. A weight lifted from his shoulders as the words left his lips, though a new tension settled in his chest as he searched her eyes for a reaction. Soraya's gaze softened, though a flicker of sadness crossed her face. I thought as much. That would explain why I feel so drawn to you. But Kaeren, I can't stay. My council wouldn't allow it. I'm forbidden to fall in love. Can't you defy them? Kaeren asked, desperation seeping into his voice. His wolf whined at the thought of losing her. If I defy them, they'll kill me. Worse, they'll come after you, thinking you're the reason for my betrayal. Soraya explained, lowering her eyes as waves of fear rolled off her. What about asking to be released from your service? Surely after all these years they'd grant you that, Kaeren suggested. his voice filled with hope. I could ask, Soraya said hesitantly, but I doubt they'll agree. I promise I'll try to come back to you within a year. I'll wait for you, Kaeren said firmly, trying to mask the vulnerability in his voice. You were my mate, Kaeren, Soraya replied, kneeling beside him. I will return to you when I can. Before he could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him. Kaeren savoured the feel of her lips against his, cherishing the brief yet electrifying connection. Her body trembled as their kiss deepened, but as quickly as it began, it ended. Kaeren watched as Soraya reached for her coat. Without hesitation, he shifted back into his wolf form. She ran her fingers under his chin, scratching affectionately, and Kaeren let out a low, contented growl. Then she turned and disappeared into the forest, her figure fading into the trees. Every instinct in Kaeren screamed at him to chase her, to bring her back and keep her by his side, but he knew she had to face her counsel and fulfill her duties. Tilting his head to the sky, Kaeren released a long, mournful howl, sending his mate off with the sound of his song. When her scent faded from the breeze, Kaeren turned toward the cabin. His paws felt heavy as he trudged back home. He would give her a year to return, but if she didn't come back, he would go and find her himself. For now, Kaeren resolved to focus on his pack. They needed him to be strong, to lead them as their accidental alpha, but even as he tried to push thoughts of Soraya aside, his heart ached for her return. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to know the country in which you are staying while listening to this story. Which country is that? And would you also like to listen to part 2 of this story? Please comment below.